Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Dr. Michael Hoerger. I'm grateful to be here today with you for the Long COVID Defense Series Part 3 on March 4th, 2026 during International Long COVID Awareness Month. First, I just want to say this plainly, Long COVID is a major public health crisis and a disability justice crisis. It affects people of all ages. It can harm families, work, education, our entire future. One of the hardest parts for many people living with Long COVID is not just the illness itself, but being dismissed, minimized, and feeling erased in healthcare, work, school, all of public life. So if you're here today as somebody living with Long COVID, as a caregiver, clinician, researcher, advocate, ally, whoever you are, thank you. Showing up for these events matters, especially as the world tries to move on without any kind of accountability. I want to thank Mask Together America for hosting this series and for making a space for truth-telling. Mask Together America is a volunteer-run public health education and advocacy organization created in 2020. Its work since the beginning to raise awareness and normalize prevention, including using multi-layered mitigation, featuring people wearing masks, sharing evidence-based information, and hosting forums that are important like this. MTA emphasizes public health in a way that it's always been taught, which is to use multi-layered mitigation, masks, cleaning indoor air, testing, staying home when you're sick, getting treatment when you need it, and making policies that make prevention more feasible for real people. Over time, MTA has become a community where many members identify as high risk or part of patient communities. MTA has explicitly framed prevention as an issue of health equity and disability justice because access to safer air and safer public spaces should not be treated by a luxury for anyone. The mission is exactly why MTA launched the Long COVID Defense Series starting in November 2025 to fight the erasure of Long COVID, to elevate patient-led and science-informed perspectives, and to connect people across countries who are working, often without institutional support, to protect lives and demand recognition, care, and prevention. So today's event is hosted and emceed by Sarah Cahill, Angelique Corthals, and Robi Tamargo. And I especially want to acknowledge the organizer, Julie Lam, whose steady work helps make gatherings like this possible. In observance of International Long COVID Awareness Month, we're also here to learn from and stand with 6 speakers who are helping create a powerful and memorable event. We've got Delphine Crespo, president of the Association of Long COVID Aragón. We've got Steele, co-founder of Clean Air Advocacy Ireland. Elisa Perego of Long COVID Rise Up, an expert member and the person widely credited with first using Long COVID as a term on social media in 2020. Pamela Morrison, Long COVID Advocacy Ireland. Angela L., creator of International Long COVID Awareness Day. Devin Russell, founder of Long COVID Foundation. And I'm grateful to each of you for lending your expertise, your lived experience, and your time. And to everyone attending, thank you for being a part of this community that refuses to accept erasure as a default. As we move into today's program, I hope we hold onto 2 truths at once. Long COVID deserves urgency in research and clinical care and public health and in workplace protections. And prevention deserves to be normalized because fewer infections means fewer people joining the Long COVID community against their will, and that people have more time to recover from their illness. With that, I'm honored to kick us off, and I'm very glad you're here. I'll now turn it over to the host to begin our first Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to all of you for being here. We can't do this without you, so we appreciate you being here to share your stories and learn more about this disease with us. Our first speaker tonight is Delphine Crespo, president of the Association of Long COVID Aragón. With a bachelor's degree in foreign languages applied to international trade, French, English, and Spanish from the University of Paris, La Sorbonne, France, and a master's degree in international hotel management from the University of Paris, Sorbonne, France, Delphine Crespo changed her professional orientation some years ago to the world of communication and marketing after studying digital marketing at ESSEC Barcelona and transcreation and multilingual advertising at ISTRAD Seville. She worked in several advertising agencies until, after moving to a new city for personal reasons, she got infected with SARS-CoV-2 in March 2020 when she was working in the offices of a hospital, never recovered from COVID-19, and developed long COVID. Patient groups were formed in Spain in May 2020, so she was following them in social networks very closely. And as soon as the Aragonese collective was formed in December 2020, she immediately joined to help it be built. When the association was formed in October 2021, she became its president. Since then, she has participated, together with other Spanish long COVID associations, in many meetings with the Spanish Ministry of Health, leading to the inclusion of long COVID as a priority chronic disease in July 2025. They have also met with other Spanish ministries and promoted the vote of a parliamentary resolution in favor of long COVID in November 2024, which would set the political trend to be followed by the different ministries in the future. She also collaborates with associations in other countries, especially in Europe, with which she created a common manifesto last year for the 5th anniversary of COVID-19 and the Long COVID Awareness Month, or the Long COVID Declaration, last October 2025. So Delphine, thank you so much for being here. Your presence is a wonderful gift to us. Our first question for the night is, what is long COVID to you?
First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation and hi to everybody. To me, long COVID would be the chronic phase of what we all know as acute COVID-19 caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which can lead to persistent symptoms even years after infection. Some of us, in fact, are now entering the 6 year of illness. It is a unique multisystemic disease with a clear biological cause which can damage multiple organs and as such must be studied. We need urgent funds for specific studies and clinical trials in SARS-CoV-2 infections and long COVID. In fact, we already know the main pathophysiological mechanisms: viral persistence and tissue reservoirs, chronic immune activation, immune dysregulation, microflows, coagulation abnormality, organ damage. Over the course of the time, many of us show the symptoms become chronic, and without proper treatment, organic damage starts to become noticeable. For example, lung or heart fibrosis, myocardial injuries, kidney damage, etc. We also have autoimmunity and autoantibodies. A subset of patients show potentially contributing to vasculopathy, dysautonomy, and other systemic symptoms. But to me, long COVID is also a priority chronic disease, as Sarah was mentioning before, and as officially declared by the Spanish Minister of Health, Mónica García, after more than 1 year and a half of common work with several Spanish long patient organizations, including Long COVID Aragón and the administration. It has been included in the 2025-2028 strategy for addressing chronicity by the authorities, so that its inclusion in the healthcare system can be extended. On July the 4th, 2025, Spain Ministry of Health and the autonomous communities health representatives officially recognized long COVID as a chronic disease in the document approved by the Interterritorial Council of the National Health System. And that's very important because the key statement in this document for the agreement reads: in the case of long COVID, multidisciplinary follow-up protocols will be implemented for people with persistent symptoms, ensuring a personalized, holistic, and evidence-based response. So that was a very big win for us all in Spain. What it is not. It is not a psychosomatic illness that is being attempted to be made trendy in another neighboring country, for example, France. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It is a biological disease that can affect all systems of the body. Therefore, we demand specific tests to rule out organic damage and follow up long-term monitoring, since it's a progressive disease that damages all the organs of the body as time goes by and we are not being treated. We urgently need risk management of what can cause the disease mechanisms in our body and not being told to self-manage symptoms one by one, only selecting those which can be manageable through an app, for example, as it is dangerous for patients who won't have real diagnostic and follow-up from doctors. So long COVID for me would be the chronic phase of COVID-19, and researchers need to focus on the etiology of the disease in order to find treatments and a cure. Currently, we are being given dozens of palliative medications to try to alleviate the dozens of symptoms we accumulate with no clear improvement. In fact, most of us are getting worse with the passing of the years.
What does the Global Long COVID Declaration stand for?
The Global Long COVID Declaration was launched in October 27, 2025 by patient-led organizations, including our own organization, Long COVID Aragón, but not only. But I will develop in the following question who our partners are in this declaration. And it stands as a powerful call to action. It declares long COVID not only as a fading mystery, but as a vascular multisystemic chronic disease directly caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus. And after 6 years of suffering now, it demands the world stop pretending this crisis is over. You can read it in the website longcovidriseup.eu if you haven't already. And I think this declaration really matters because at its core, it embodies nothing about us without us. It means that long COVID patient organizations and advocates must lead research, policy, and care. We are demanding evidence-based solutions backed by thousands of studies showing organ damage from reinfections, for example, hearts weakened, lungs scared, brain fogged, and risks of cancer rising over time. It rejects the dangerous erasure we have faced, governments dismantling testing, surveillance, and protections while calling infections mild or renaming long COVID to hide its viral roots. This isn't over. SARS-CoV-2 circulates freely, fueling new waves of disability each time. As far as our demands are concerned, I could summarize them as follows. Recognition as a chronic disease also, and it is very sad, but we need to address it. Long COVID kills slowly. I think that unfortunately, we have all recently lost members of our community due to this disease. So that's very tragic, and people has to know it. Cardiovascular events, neurological decline, multi-organ failure. We want no more denial. Long COVID organizations and advocates leadership. We want to be included in every decisions. Our lived expertise catches what researchers miss. We want prevention now. Mask mandates indoors again. Respirators N95 or A52 in healthcare for all, staff, patients, visitors, extending to public interiors like transportation, stores and schools, or everywhere we need to protect people. Clean air everywhere, ventilation, filtration, CO2 monitors, etc. And access to preventive treatments. For research acceleration, as for long COVID biomarker for diagnosis, long COVID clinical trials for curative and disease-modifying treatments, long-term studies on cancer, heart risks, etc. Active medical care for comprehensive long COVID guidelines, not rest and wait or self-management of the disease, and no one left behind. The most vulnerable, those without access to broad information or quality care, tend to be the most impacted by organ damage or life-threatening events. On this path to March 15th International Long COVID Awareness Day, the declaration remains open for signature by long COVID organization, researchers, and advocates. So if you're one of them, you can join us.
Why do long COVID patient-led organizations, including the Association of Long COVID Aragón, Winslow Santé Publique and Mask Together America joined together to create the Long COVID Declaration.
Passionate organizations like Long COVID Aragón, Winslow Santé Publique, and Mask Together America united to create the Long COVID Declaration to demand urgent global action on a chronic disease affecting millions, countering systemic erasure and policy inaction. The Long COVID Declaration is indeed a unified statement from different organizations and advocates living with long COVID, including Long COVID Aragón as one of its authors and promoters, but also Winslow Santé Publique, Colectivo de Afectados y Afectades per la COVID Persiste en Catalunya, researcher Elisa Perego, International Long COVID Awareness, MaskTogetherAmerica, and WHN Global from different countries such as Spain, Italy, France, and the United States of America. Some organizations already knew each other from having made a joint manifesto from the Long COVID Awareness Day last year in 2025, as you already mentioned before, Winslow Santé Publique, the Colectivo of Catalonia, and us, for example. And I think this was the seed that planted the idea of a more lasting and broader collaboration with a European and why not international reach. We continued to talk through the year about the need to make some kind of statement that would go beyond the format of a manifesto and would include more entities. And that's basically how the idea was born. Each of us knew other organizations in other countries. Some of us knew, in fact, the same, and we contacted them. And we did have certain requirements. These organizations had to place SARS-CoV-2 infection at the heart of our disease, long COVID, as well as prevention, which we see as being too neglected by many others. So we started contacting their representative focused on some key concepts and started to write the declaration. The core reasons for collaboration were, as I already mentioned before, that our organization insisted on the premise of direct involvement on long COVID advocates and orgs in research, policy, and care decisions to avoid biased and incomplete approaches. It was also about recognition and urgency, because long COVID is a vascular, multisystemic chronic disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 with proven risks of organ damage, cardiovascular events, neurological issues, and deaths. For example, over 5,000 long COVID deaths by 2024 in the US, likely undercounted. We reject delays after more than 6 years now. We wanted to fight erasure and denial. Despite ongoing circulation and reinfections, government dismantled testing and prevention everywhere. For example, PCR tests, cross-ventilation, clean air regulation, mask mandates, renaming the conditions and treating it as mild like a cold, erasing its viral cause and patient voices. We wanted to push for prevention and treatments. We demand clean air measures, preventive treatments, biomarker clinical trials for curative therapies, and monitoring for long-term risks like other diseases, such as, for example, cancer and so many others. Several associations also noticed that our illness was constantly being used by other syndromes, leading to its increasing invisibility, especially when its biological cause, infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, was omitted from many narratives, resulting in millions of patients affected by long COVID being abandoned along the way. This is why we insisted on the nothing about us without us premise, requiring long COVID experts to lead policies and representation, reject renaming the condition, and erasing its viral cause amid ongoing global infections. I would also like to reiterate the need to recognize long COVID as a disease on its own, which would also benefit other illnesses on the end, from specific treatment recommendation tailored to the affected organ systems, as well as dedicated research funding, like what exists, for example, for hepatitis or HIV. Those directly affected long COVID organization advocates must be able to participate indecisions themselves and not have treatments imposed on them that are suitable for others. Recent publications in important articles, I'm thinking of in lymphocytes population 20 months after infection from SciDirect, the recent position paper from the European Society of Neurology and the European Consensus of Scientific Societies of Cardiology on long COVID affecting the heart. Unfortunately, these scientifically concrete elements do not translate into an appropriate sense of urgency, which they should. The current need for research into long COVID is urgent for us, but could also help prevent future damage and address the widespread nature of certain conditions. Remember, our children's generation is constantly exposed to the infection. The declaration is also a call to action for future generations to develop for them preventive treatments and preventions regulations.
The ME/CFS community believes that long COVID is ME/CFS, just another infection-associated condition. How would that affect the long COVID community and long COVID research?
Well, equating long COVID fully with ME/CFS would have, and I think is already having, in fact, significant, mostly negative repercussion for the long COVID community and research, despite some symptom overlaps. Long COVID emerged as a virus-specific diagnosis tied to SARS-CoV-2, sparkling global recognition and millions seeking care. Merging it into ME/CFS, just another trigger, dilutes this, implying it's just a fatigue syndrome rather than a novel multisystemic disease affecting between 10 to 30% of infections, depending on the severity and variants. The erasure of long COVID narrative by other organizations and institutions, to me, is quite a nonsense in terms of patient-led advocacy and scientific research. We also have, in a part, governments and public health bodies eliminating acute COVID-19 testing, which obliterates the starting point for diagnosing long COVID as a viral chronic disease, which, without confirming infections, patients face escalated dismissal because symptoms are misattributed to psychosomatic causes, unrelated comorbidities, post-pandemic fatigue, or even other conditions. So proposals to rebrand long COVID like AICC, PICE, ME/CFS explicitly downplay the virus roles, using the causal link to SARS-CoV-2, which quite established, and especially Elisa Perego, who coined the term. This reflects profound disregard for those who raised the alarm through grassroots movements, reducing a multisystemic vascular disease complete with immune dysfunction, microclots, and long-term risk like cancer, neurodegeneration to vague, non-specific labels. I think that such renaming fragments the community, excludes severe and atypical presentation, and interferes with targeted research into mechanisms like viral reservoirs, for example. It fails to grasp our core message. Long COVID is caused by a virus, demanding virus-specific trials, biomarkers, and prevention, like clean air, mask, antivirals, etc. These actions perpetuate systemic silencing, prioritizing convenience over evidence and equity. As the declaration signatories, we unite to state again, nothing about us without us. Long COVID voices must lead, ensuring unbiased policies that honor our diverse realities and prevent further harm from reinfections. Also, if the narrative becomes long COVID is equal ME/CFS, nothing new here. I think we have several problems here because as long COVID is explicitly tied to SARS-CoV-2 and reinfections, this viral and public health framing underpins arguments for mask, clean air, and reinfection prevention. So calling it just ME/CFS risks shifting attention away from active viral circulation and preventable harm. Policymakers can say, okay, this is just the same as before, and we don't need COVID-specific measures. And weakening arguments for mask mandates, indoor protection, and surveillance. Additionally, many long COVID patients have clear documented organ damage like cardiac, pulmonary, renal, neurological, clotting disorders, etc. If everyone is relabeled as ME/CFS, there is a danger that concrete pathologies are under-investigated or under-treated because they are assumed to be part of a generic syndrome rather than a specific long COVID injury pattern, which could be dangerous for patients. So also for research, for questions of research and clinical trials, I think long COVID provides large and well-timed cohorts with known infections onset and rich virological data, which is quite rare in previous ME/CFS cohort. If everything is folded into ME/CFS, funders may stop investing in SARS-CoV-2 specific mechanisms like viral persistence, microclots, endothelial damage, immune imprinting, which are vital not just for long COVID, but for future pandemics. Trial design only around classic ME/CFS case definition risks, excluding long COVID patients with prominent cardiovascular, respiratory clotting complication, or who do not meet ME/CFS criteria, who are the many, thereby diluting treatment signals and abandoning them. And I think it's quite a danger too. So if the statement long COVID as ME/CFS becomes dominant and unqualified, the risks are serious, weakening the long COVID community's leverage on prevention, public health measure, and accountability for ongoing SARS-CoV-2 transmission, diluting SARS-CoV-2 specific research, and obscuring serious organ damage phenotypes, and maybe being another 30 or 40 years without no cure or treatment, when we were just starting to get new research, which could have benefited millions of patients from other conditions too.
Thank you. All right, our final question for this evening. What stigmas do long COVID patients struggle with?
I would like to reflect on the emergence of long COVID patient collective since 2020 and the devastating psychological impact that 6 long years of a majority of medical, social, and institutional denial has had on patients still. It is a story of resilience and struggle, but also of silent suffering, often rendered invisible. And above all, the stigma has scared their life and our lives. When the COVID-19 pandemic burst into our lives in early 2020, attention naturally focused on the acute phase, hospital situation, and tragic mortality rates. But as months passed, a disturbing new pattern emerged. People who, after overcoming the initial infection, never recovered their health, debilitating symptoms persisted. We were the long haulers, soon known as long COVID patients, thanks to Elisa. And at first, patients faced utter isolation. Then they visited doctors and described like strange persistent symptoms. And they often found like incredulous stares, anxiety, depression diagnoses, and simply no answers. It's all in your head. You need more rest. You should exercise or take up painting. I got this one. This was the harsh reality for millions. Medical gaslighting became our daily torment, a form of silent violence that dismissed physical agony as psychological. The stigma was brutal. Patients were labeled as anxious, depressed, lazy, or attention-seeking. Their very reality invalidated by those meant to help. Yet human beings are social by nature, and in the digital age, we found an echo online in Facebook, WhatsApp, and most of all in the old social network Twitter. I thought I was alone. My doctor doesn't believe me. I have this symptom, me too, blah, blah. And that's how we found out all together in Spain. I mean, May 2020, as Sarah was mentioning before, and Grassroots Born. We fought for voice amid denial first in the social media and then in the institutions. I still remember when the long COVID unit Can Ruti in Badalona, Catalonia, launched a communications campaign in social media that was saying, "No te lo inventas," you don't make it up, like it's for real. People were crying with emotion because it was the first time in Spain, even before the government recognized it, that doctors were saying to us that it was for real. And then the campaign was saying, "Long COVID is a real disease. Those of you who suffer from it are not alone." It was huge. I remember it was the first time, and patients were so relieved, and so they were so emotional about that because it was the first time someone was saying that it was real, it was for real. So imagine the stigma. It was in 2023, if I don't remember. So it was not, it was 3 years after the beginning. Now consider a second layer, living with a disabling illness that steals your previous life, job, relationships, everything, and is denied by the system sworn to protect you. So constant dismissal, your pain is imaginary, economic ruin, unable to work, yet denied sick leave or disability recognition, many spiraled into poverty, feeling like burdens to families, social isolations, friends and relatives seeing no clear cause. Are you still sick? Are you making it up? For 60 years, we endured a limbo of disease and denial, each day as a battle, not just against symptoms, but against institutional indifference and societal stigma against a new unknown disease, and against the protective measures we take for our health, such as face masks. That's a big one. Because of the back to normal policies, when people see us wearing a mask, some even get scared. Others just give us bad look. This is not only a biomedical problem, but a deeply social and ethical one. When prevention is treated like overreaction, long COVID patients are portrayed as anxious, exaggerated, or unable to move on. Their efforts to protect themselves, wearing high filtration masks, asking for clean air, requesting remote options, are often met with eye-rolling, ridicule, or hostility. That stigma adds an extra layer of suffering. Many hide their precautions to avoid conflict or push themselves into unsafe situations to avoid being seen as difficult or problematic with the conflict. In other words, the absence of prevention produces not just more disease, but more stigma. So it would be a long, sociological debate, but we could say that our acute visible disease model struggles with a chronic multisystemic illness, and long COVID demands interdisciplinary research and patient listening to combat this stigma. And for future-proofing crises, we need to integrate patient voices from day one, rapid listening and mechanism to prevent re-victimization and stigma. On a positive note, we have recent win in Spain, like Sarah mentioned before, like the non-law proposition and the chronicity plan inclusion, on which are historic fruits on this fight. But the core lesson are patient voice, when organized, can transform systems, and the battle for health, equity, visibility, and dignity against stigma is ongoing. No one else should wait 6 years or more for their suffering to be.
Thank you so much, Delphine. Appreciate all of the work that you're doing, and I appreciate you spending time with us tonight, especially in a time zone that's not as comfortable for you as it is for some of us. We will take just about a minute break, and then we're going to talk to Dr. Ciara Steele from Clean Air Advocacy Ireland. So go grab that snack or that drink of water and come back here in 1 minute.
Delphine, thank you so much for chatting with us tonight. I'm just going to drop the link to Long COVID Rise Up in the chat for everyone to see all the hard work you and all the other organizations put together. We ran out of time, but I wish that we can spend more time to talk about all the great work you have been doing in raising awareness,
No problem.
fighting for the truth.
I hope my English was understandable tonight because I had a little crash before. So
it was perfect.
It was perfect.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You did amazing.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Delphine.
Thank you.
We love you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Ciara Steele from Clean Air Advocacy Ireland. Dr. Ciara Steele is a general practitioner who's been working in Ireland for 30 years. Dr. Steele co-founded Clean Air Advocacy Ireland in 2024. CAAI is a collective of healthcare workers, teachers, parents, and concerned individuals who are united in raising awareness of the urgent necessity to implement clean air of indoor air for human health. The group advocates for the application and enforcement of indoor air quality standards in all publicly accessible indoor spaces, particularly high risk and high occupancy settings such as schools and healthcare facilities. Clean indoor air is an equality, disability, inclusion, and women's issue. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the devastating acute and long-term health impacts of airborne pathogens like SARS-CoV-2. The emerging evidence also reflects how exposure to airborne pathogens and pollutants contributes to non-communicable diseases such as asthma, COPD, heart failure, mental health issues, and immunity. All of this demands a culture change in individual responsibility, medical advice, government policy, and global standards to mitigate these impacts on human health. Awareness and evidence of air quality impacts on human health are increasing and can no longer be ignored. We must speak up, especially for those who can't advocate for themselves, and call for clean indoor air as a human right. So thank you for being with us, Dr. Ciara. Our first question for you is, how is long COVID defined for physicians?
Well, I suppose we go by the generic definitions, but I would have to say, leading on from Delphine's inclusive attitude, that nothing for us without us is really lacking from all of the definitions that are currently widespread. Like the WHO definition, it's defined as a continuation or development of new symptoms 3 months after the initial SARS-CoV-2 infection, with these symptoms lasting for at least 2 months with no other explanation. The Delphi consensus in 2021 tried to arrive at a consensus definition with the understanding that emerging evidence may change definitions as time came on. And they defined post-COVID condition occurring in individuals with a history of probable or with a confirmed or probable history of SARS-CoV-2 infection, usually 3 months from the onset of COVID-19 symptoms, lasting for at least 2 months, cannot be explained by alternative diagnosis, and listed some common symptoms, including fatigue, shortness of breath, cognitive dysfunction, but also others that generally have an impact on everyday functioning. So that incorporated daily functioning into the definition that was relevant. Then the NASEM, or the National Academic Sciences of Engineering and Medicine, described long COVID as SARS-CoV-2 infection persisting beyond 3 months, presenting as continuous, relapsing, and remitting or progressive disease state affecting one or more organs. So they took into account the non-linear sort of trajectory of long COVID that maybe wasn't alluded to in the other definitions. Nice guidance then alludes to signs and symptoms. Again, with the 12-week period, not explained by an alternative diagnosis, but cognizant of the 4 to 12 week period as well. And our guidance in Ireland in the ICGP defines long COVID as a clinical syndrome of enduring bothersome symptoms impacting on the patient's return to normal function. So function is incorporated into the definition, and roles and responsibilities for that persist for 12 weeks or more following probable or confirmed COVID-19 infection. So it's not dependent on a confirmed test, and there's the reviews of the sort of multiple definitions have found that they're sort of unsatisfactory for, giving complete guidance to diagnosis and defining long COVID. There's a general practitioner review that looked at all standard definitions of long COVID in 34 European countries. And they found significant variation in the long COVID definitions, significant variation of the existing definitions that were applied, and that sort of the reason the definition is important is it highlights challenges in diagnosis for patients, and the variability in the clinical criteria, and issues with implementing diagnostic codes, which could identify people for trials, I suppose, and identifying people for referral for onward to secondary and tertiary care. So the findings in that particular study of the European Journal of General Practice in 25 underscored the need for a unified approach in both definition, application of definition, and acknowledgement of the full clinical criteria for long COVID, so that resource allocation and policy can be brought forward from a sort of unified strategic conjoined definition going forward. So I hope that might give an overview from the perspective here.
Yes, thank you. We don't get the physician point of view very often, so it's very helpful to hear about it.
Yeah, I do want to counter that by saying that, like me personally, as a general practitioner, I'm learning from patients. Really, patients are really well informed about their own condition, and more so than a lot of us in the medical field. Learning really from the patient is, a major aspect of what we can do. Listening with empathy, really.
How does a physician detect long COVID in a patient? What are the diagnostic guidelines for long COVID, and do they exist?
Exactly. And I suppose, guidelines are, born out of definitions. If the definitions are not unified or confusing in some way, that can be challenging for both patient and GP or doctors in further care. I suppose the guidelines that we would refer to mostly would be sort of like a loose framework that the ICGP guide has produced. We have a forum article that the ICGP produces every month, and we had guidance published in that in 2023. So that sort of defines a framework for us in Ireland on how we can diagnose and refer people. But the NICE guidelines, the NG 188, I suppose, is the definitive guideline we would apply here. And they just, I suppose, we identify patients by the history, the contemporaneous history, because there's a time frame in most of the definitions. So when did somebody start having symptoms? But we also need to be cognizant of the fact that it's not a linear diagnosis. Some studies that are a FADA study in Ireland that looked at the prevalence of long COVID. It was a self-reporting study, and I'm sure Pamela might be talking about that more later on. there was different time frames on history. People who had no symptoms at the start of the study had symptoms at the end, and vice versa. So history of symptoms and initiation of symptoms is important, but it's not always instructive. Persistent symptoms, functional impact, whether there's post-exertional malaise is often indicative, whether there's other, long COVID syndrome defining symptoms such as orthostatic intolerance, tachycardia, sleep disturbances, dysautonomia, they can all guide us on the diagnosis. And the HSE has criteria that are very similar, and the timing and duration of symptoms and the history of other health conditions, identification of risk factors or those in risk cohorts, can also lead us to detecting long COVID. But the guidelines are loose, I find. Sometimes a patient can present with the suspicion of the diagnosis. Sometimes patients fit into a lot of the symptoms, but they aren't aware that a diagnosis might apply to them. And that's another interesting aspect of the FODA study, that a definition was presented to the cohort of responders, and after the definition was presented, as an increased number of patients self-identified as having long COVID. So some people might be attributing their fatigue or dizziness or presyncope or orthostatic intolerance to other conditions, pre-existing conditions, and self-attributing to comorbidities like menopause or autoimmune disease or family history or something like that. So it's very challenging, really, because it's so heterogeneous, isn't it? Everybody has such varying symptoms, such fluctuating symptoms. When you present to your GP, you might be fine that day, or your tests might be normal, and yet you're really feeling like so different to how you felt like before. You might feel like a completely different person than you felt like before, and you might be feeling bewildered that there's no clear pathway as to why this should be so. So I think I have to admit, like, I find it completely unsatisfactory that there's no clear pathway answers or ability to help in a lot of the situations where people present with symptoms. And I suppose the role is really trying to differentiate and exclude any sort of serious diagnosis, try and point to symptomatic help, and refer on then to secondary or tertiary care if needed. So the guidelines are loose, and I feel like research really needs to be stepped up in order to provide adequate guidelines and pathways, clinical pathways going forward.
As a doctor, can you tell how your patients develop long COVID?
I suppose, there's so many different phenotypes. I suppose, like with the ICGP, there's supposed to 4 categories: fatigue, post-exertional malaise, respiratory symptoms, and neurocognitive symptoms. But the presentations are so wide, and there's so many hypotheses, whether it's viral persistence or exacerbation of autoimmunity, or newly induced autoimmunity, or tissue damage, or persistent spike, or latent herpes virus reactivation, or HPA disruption or immune dysregulation, endothelial dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction. I suppose you can sort of like try and get a pattern of what might occur, but the pathogenesis or what's causing it is really at the hypothesis and research stage, and it's sort of there's no way to reassure a patient as to what is causing this. Like in other conditions where we know what's causing it, we know how to treat it, we know what the prognosis is. It's very hard to offer that to somebody with long COVID, or to give any sense of reassurance in that regard. So we can sort of identify people that are at higher risk, people in higher risk jobs, and people that have immunosuppression, that have a history of potentially acute severe COVID, but then some studies show that there's higher incidence of long COVID persistent symptoms, outside of hospital. So research can be conflicting at times as well. So I think that it's very difficult to give a satisfactory answer to a patient presenting with what's causing this or how did this happen.
How do you reduce the risk of developing the onset and relapse of long COVID?
Well, I suppose that the main is not to catch SARS-CoV-2. I mean that's the main element of not developing long COVID prevention. And I suppose we can all realize that there's a complete gap in that at the moment, that, long COVID is still happening, SARS-CoV-2 is still happening. And, just last week we had a little baby who was really unwell, 6-week-old baby admitted, so it's still circulating. We're not testing enough. And we're not identifying SARS-CoV-2 enough. We're not preventing enough. We're not cleaning the air enough. We're not masking enough. We're not staying at home. We're not instructing kids to stay home from school if they're sick. We're really sort of not doing enough prevention. So the way not to get long COVID is not to catch SARS-CoV-2. So we know that there's a massive amount of long COVID in the world today. The various studies identify rates from 6%, a lot from 10, 15, 20% of cases of SARS-CoV-2 end up with long COVID. Some self-reporting studies, it's as high as 50%. So there's a massive incidence of long COVID from COVID infection. So prevention, wearing masks, cleaning the air, preventing recurrent infection. We know that there's between a 30 and 50% increased risk of long COVID with recurrent infections. People who have long COVID can relapse more with any infection, but especially repeat SARS-CoV-2 infection as well. So prevention of infection is one of the major ways not to either contract long COVID or to relapse. I suppose early intervention with antivirals early on in the course of the disease can prevent viral replication, can help to reduce viral persistence. That's one of the hypotheses that can help. And metformin, I suppose, is newly recognized as having a role, especially early on in the disease. There can be a 33% risk reduction with metformin in one study. One study showed that increased to 50% if initiated in the first 3 days of SARS-CoV infection. So adjusting guidelines to accept emerging evidence is another way of helping to prevent long COVID down the line. I suppose, long COVID is or SARS-CoV-2 if you are immunosuppressed, so we need to take extra care in those patient cohorts. People with existing autoimmune disease need to take greater care, and we need to be instructing our patients of that. And people who have cancer need to be careful, and because of the poor prognosis and outcomes of patients who do contract SARS-CoV-2 with cancer. So we need to be reiterating these facts that we know from research, so that people who not only from long COVID and not only have worsened, we need to prevent worsened outcomes, not only in terms of long COVID, but also in terms of chronic non-communicable disease, worsening outcomes from people with underlying conditions, and worsening people in our oncology world as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention vaccination there and preventing. Obviously vaccination is hugely important in preventing long COVID, and both with primary vaccination and with boosters. So, sorry, I forgot to mention that before.
How do physicians learn about long COVID in adults and children? Do medical schools teach about long COVID?
So I suppose we learn from personal reading, we learn from our patients, we learn from peer education, we learn from guidance. Patient experience is a huge learning, because patients often have to resort to self-education online, finding what works for them. Yeah, the clinic, our ICGP, the Irish College of General Practitioners, has a long COVID guide for GPs. So the IMO, the Irish Medical Organization, has guidance, and BMA, the British Medical Association has guidance. So that's really how we learn. But there was one study done, it was actually done by some of the trainees, which was an investigation into general practitioners' experience with long COVID in Ireland. And it really showed that there was a lack of confidence in the diagnosis and management of long COVID within our community, and that more education was needed, more guidelines were needed, and that we need to be talking about it more, and that we need to be offering more guidance on how to refer to secondary and tertiary services, that the awareness of the services, what they provide, how they can help people, and sort of how different pathways can help particular people and what mightn't help them at all. So, it's really important not to sort of advise graduated exercise therapy, that we have to be cognizant of PEM, that needs to be more awareness about that there needs to be more maybe community training of physiotherapies to show how pacing can work for you, and got more guidance on that within the community. But there's definitely more demand for increased education and awareness within our own medical community, as self-reported in that study.
Can a primary care or internist diagnose a patient with long COVID in Ireland, or do patients need to see a long COVID specialist to obtain a diagnosis of long COVID, like what happens in the US?
Yeah, we can diagnose long COVID in primary care, and that's multifactorial from the point of view of whether the patient is accepting of a diagnosis in primary care, or whether they want a specialist review. The guidelines, it's quite subjective as well. Sometimes there's no particular screening questionnaire like a PHQ-9 for depression, or, there's no biomarkers, there's no test, there's no imaging that can say definitively that you have this. So it's like in primary care, I'd say it's a negotiated diagnosis. If somebody feels they have it and it fits, and anything serious is excluded, there's no barrier to to applying a diagnosis in primary care. But mostly, in my experience, people who have significant functional impact are really looking for therapeutic intervention, or some help and some support. There is occupational therapy. There's six or seven secondary referral centres in Ireland. They would be located in the cities mainly. They're located in the tertiary referral hospitals. So they would have multidisciplinary teams that are associated with diagnosis, respiratory investigations, cardiac investigations, OT, potentially psychological support pathways as well, if people are suffering from anxiety or depression in combination, not as a cause, but in combination with their long COVID diagnosis. Occupational health as well might be aligned with those services. So we can diagnose, there's no barrier to that, but in general, I have to say what happens is that a lot of people aren't recognizing long COVID in themselves. They're attributing their fatigue or their lack of interest in sport, or for example, to just different symptoms, or they're not recognizing them. So they're not coming into us at all. Then people who are coming into us, that we can try and refer locally to address with specific symptoms to people who maybe have moderate symptoms. But we find people with moderate or to moderate severe symptoms really go to a consultant for specialist diagnosis.
Thank you. This is our final question for your session. Does vaccination guarantee that patients will not develop long COVID after an infection?
No, vaccination doesn't guarantee that a patient will not develop long COVID after an infection, but it certainly the studies will confirm, especially studies that have had one or two vaccinations prior to a COVID infection, have shown that there is reduced risk of long COVID after vaccination. Vaccination seems to prevent from serious hospitalization and death, and does have about a 33% protective factor for long COVID as well in some studies. So booster vaccination can also help by vaccination, and booster vaccination can help by reducing serious illness, and serious illness can go on then to generate long COVID. So vaccinations and booster vaccinations can help, but certainly it's not an answer that, initially when vaccinations came out, that we thought would be very helpful in preventing long COVID. It doesn't seem to, as much as we thought at the start.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ciara. We really appreciate you being here, especially, I think it's 10:30 your time. So thank you for spending your evening with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'll be so interested in listening to the other speakers.
Yes. We do have about 3 minutes left. If there's anything that you would like to address that we didn't get time to talk about, I'd love to give you the chance just to soapbox on anything that you'd like.
I suppose, we are interested in cleaning the air as a preventive strategy, along with masking, along with other mitigations, as a sort of, where I live in Ireland, there's sort of mixed reaction to masks, and I suppose it's a non-user independent way of reducing risk. Although obviously a good, well-fitting respirator, FFP2 as we call it here, or KN95 or KN99, is obviously very effective in preventing SARS-CoV-2 infection. So there's plenty of reasons to clean the air. Airborne infection with virus is important, but also in high occupancy settings like hospitals, fungus, bacteria, and even other airborne particles like PM2.5, pollen. So there's lots of reasons, lots of medical and health reasons to clean the air, and we'd really advocate for more awareness for that as well.
Thank you so much. All right, we are going to take a 7-minute break.
Thank you.
And when we get back, we'll return at 5:45 Eastern Time. We will hear from Dr. Elisa Perego, and we will see you all in a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Steele, for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much, Julie. I'm so aware that the patient is really the expert in the room here. So we really just do try and listen and empathize, and try and validate people's symptoms. And it amazes me, I think it amazes me where long COVID can arise. We have children, adolescents, very strong men, very frail elderly patients. It's really indiscriminate as to where long COVID will have a lasting and persistent effect for people. So I suppose we're not safe just because we didn't react the first time, and so really prevention of infection is such a serious intervention. it is
I know,
disappointing.
unfortunately, we are seeing so many of healthcare providers that are not wearing masks, even in like healthcare setting, which exposure is so high in the healthcare setting. And also there's this like minimization of Omicron variants and treating it as like a cold. But actually, I was infected with the Omicron
Yeah,
variant. I was in the first wave. Even though I was fully vaccinated and boosted, I still developed long COVID. My condition it damaged my kidneys. I lost 20% of kidney function. And following with that was like long COVID actually progressed. It was
yeah,
initially serious eye pain and like very dizzy all the time, when I drive. And then eventually I have lipid dysfunction.
yeah.
I have high
Profound.
cholesterol, elevated liver enzyme, and it really like 1 year, second year is like totally different list of symptoms. I become immunocompromised and keep getting reinfected, even though I wear my mask all the time. And I want to, really want the physician community to understand that no, COVID is spreading, it's not harmless. And people
Yeah,
really need to take precaution, especially to protect each other. They should protect themselves and they need to
yeah.
protect the patient because they work in a high risk environment. Why would, people protect
Mm.
themselves from exposure?
Yeah, it's a funny one, Julie. Like I wear a mask at work, and it's good to see. Like I have GP trainees, and it's nice to see them wearing a mask then as well. So modeling is really important, I think. Um, most of the doctors in our practice would wear a mask for, a respiratory clinic or something like that. But it's two-way protection. We have to protect people. People have to protect each other as well, So I fully, it makes sense to wear a mask in a high risk situation, it really, really does.
Thank you, Dr. Steele.
I might not be able to wait until the end because here it's very late.
It's an
Thank you
old
so much,
one.
Delphine.
Thank you, Delphine.
I would like to. I will listen to Elisa and maybe I will
Crash.
I had a little crash before. I was not sure I could speak English.
Well,
You're
you did
great.
very well.
You did amazing.
You're great,
Uh,
yeah.
I didn't sound amazing in my head, but
Well, it came out
thank you.
amazing, so that's great.
Well, it was very powerful, Delphine.
Thank
I
you.
was
I'm too
reading that.
perfectionist.
I was reading just a study about, the symptoms in reinfection with children, and
Mm,
it's so sad, and it's like I think
yeah.
especially with kids that it's long COVID can be unrecognized, that fatigue can be really, really strong in children, where they're just lying on the couch, and it's just, yeah, it's devastating for people, and having these sort of webinars where it's drawing attention is just really great. So thanks, Julie,
You're very welcome. Should we go to Pamela first?
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea.
Figure this out.
Yes, absolutely.
I just took a few minutes to walk my mad dog, so hang on a second. Yeah, I'm happy to start. It's just that. So take me as you find me is all I can say to you.
Hey,
Okay.
there you are. You're a little blurred, but
I'm very blurred. I
yes,
don't
if
know
you
how to improve that, but anyway, that's
so
where we are.
oh no, there you are. So if you're closer to the camera, the background's going to be blurred, but not you. So just make sure you're
Great.
close to your
I'm
camera.
most probably just merging in with the background, so don't worry.
Happens to me all the time, so I'm not worried. And not on Zoom. That's the sad part. All right. So welcome, Pamela Morrison. You are an advocate as part of the leadership team at Long COVID Advocacy Ireland. Thank you so much for being here despite the late time in Ireland. LCAAI is the patient voice of long COVID in Ireland. It's a group of patients advocating for the many with long COVID. And so the group of patient advocating for the many with long COVID from mild to severe and still suffering from the disease. They advocate for the recognition, care, and better service and research. They amplify patients' voice. They raise awareness of COVID-19 and long COVID in and of itself. They collaborate with researchers, healthcare professionals, and policymakers. They build community support to ensure no one with long COVID is left behind. Pamela was born in London. She moved with her family back to Ireland when she was 7 during an Irish recession. She put herself through college studying computing, and then returned to London in the early 90s during another Irish recession and worked as an analyst programmer. Girls didn't do that then, which is interesting because I experienced the same thing. In her work life, Pamela was an experienced senior risk professional with over 20 years global experience in strategic risk, organizational resilience, project and crisis management within the financial services industry. She has operated at all levels, including board and executive level, bringing SME and practical experience in dealing with high-impact events and large-scale global projects. During her career, she often parachuted into failing areas to identify and implementing solutions. Sorry about that. Quickly. She has a wealth of experience in a crisis, including the H1N1 pandemic, planning for the unexpected, hoping the unexpected never happens. And when it does, learning from it, which is something we should be doing with H5N1 here, but here we are. She's a subject matter expert with a proven track record for business resilience, risk management, life cycle, and development of crisis management, and developing solutions and processes to reduce repeats, impact, and risk. She loves Japanese lean methodology, which emphasize continuous improvement, eliminating waste, and organizing domains. When she semi-retired from the grind of investment banking, I can see that. In 2013, she wanted to pursue other things, to invest in writing, traveling, and spending more times with family. And that was all going to plan until, of course, March 2020, when she became ill on a trip back to see her family in Ireland. She never returned to her life in London. Today, Pamela is representing the long COVID community in Ireland. Welcome, Pamela. We're absolutely delighted to have you here.
Thanks, Angelique.
So I'm going to start with the first question. What do you believe is one of the most significant consequences of this pandemic?
Oh, there's so many, but long COVID is the big one. So long COVID's not a marginal issue, but indeed it's one of the most significant and enduring health consequences of the pandemic. That perception that a virus is binary, i.e., death or survival. You know, we've all seen that from the communications to the decision making. But we know, and now other people know, that it can trigger an avalanche of illness, decimate lives, economies, and support systems. I suppose like long COVID is the biggie, but the other things that we've learned, apart from Ciara, who I'd love as my doctor, Ciara, if only I lived in your part of Ireland, medical professionals often don't listen and don't know about viral impacts. They've gotten better, but they're learning from us, who are the experts, as Ciara rightly said, and the patients. Words really matter, especially in communication. So vax and relax was a big one in Ireland, but I'll go into that later. And so many still don't understand the impacts of lack of prevention. A pandemic response is about identifying and lowering impacts, understanding the knowns, but also the unknowns and how to manage that. So, you know, we're not sure if it's airborne. You know, that was one of the things at the time. So what do? You're precautionary. You take adequate precautions till you do know. You don't just say, oh, it's not airborne, or, oh, you kind of go, what if? Okay, the what if is bad, so we reduce that risk if we at all can. So putting all the eggs in one vaccine basket doesn't work. There has to be layers, backups, plans. And there were assumptions made, and assumptions, as we know, as they say, assumptions is it makes an ASS of you and me. That's why it's called an assumption. And public health and medical professionals, especially the ones allowed on mainstream media, didn't have a cohesive message. So they didn't seem to understand the basics of viral transmission, rigorous risk management, or fact-based messaging, and that prevention takes many forms. So that would be my kind of answer to that question.
Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent answer. And the next question is, as someone who worked in crisis management and pandemic planning during your career, was long COVID a foreseeable risk?
Absolutely. In any crisis, history is so important, but especially in a pandemic, what went before saves lives and helps guide subsequent response. So the thing is, we knew so much from what had gone before. Increased incidence of chronic illness following infectious disease outbreaks is not unique to COVID-19. Like long-term sequelae has been documented following previous pandemics. Historical experience from previous epidemics and pandemics should have made it clear from the outset that post-viral sequelae was a plausible and likely consequence of widespread SARS-CoV-2 infection. So if we look at the history, so viral illness are well documented across multiple pathogens, including 1918 influenza pandemic, HIV/AIDS epidemic, 2015-16 Ebola outbreak, 2003 SARS pandemic, 2009 H1N1 swine flu pandemic, and 2012 MERS epidemic, to name a few. And if we looked at similar coronaviruses following the 2003 severe acute respiratory syndrome SARS outbreak, a substantial proportion of patients experience persistent symptoms months to years after acute infection, including fatigue, reduced exercise tolerance, sleep disturbance, neurocognitive difficulties. Studies of survivors demonstrated ongoing functional impairment and reduced quality of life several years later, with some individuals unable to return to previous employment. Similarly, after Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, long-term pulmonary dysfunction, chronic fatigue, psychological sequelae were reported. Taken together, chronic illness following acute infection is not unusual nor unexpected in infectious disease epidemiology. And that evidence was there. It was historic. We always looked to the past to learn for the future. We always learn from the lessons from before, but for whatever reason, it wasn't taken on board. Like early clinical reports in 2020 also describe patients experiencing prolonged recovery trajectories, including ongoing fatigue, breathlessness after hospital discharge. And by mid-2020, patient-led research groups internationally were documenting persistent multi-system symptoms following even mild infections, indicating that, and I don't know why I've said even mild infections, because it was any infection, indicating that long-term sequelae were not limited to severe acute disease. The emergence of long COVID was therefore not an unforeseeable phenomenon, but rather consistent with prior scientific knowledge regarding post-viral illness. A precautionary pandemic response should have anticipated the possibility of new onset chronic illness at population scale and incorporated this risk into decision-making, surveillance, healthcare planning, and public communication from an early stage. And as someone who worked on H1N1, I was screaming at the television, what about post-viral? What about as I'm sure many people were, it was horrific.
Yeah. And also, we're screaming at the erasure of SARS-CoV-2 right now in COVID. And by the time COVID rolled around, SARS was completely forgotten. People had even forgotten that the city of Toronto in Canada had gone into lockdown. So it's horrendous, the short-term memory that happens during pandemics.
And we as part of I worked as part of a community in London, which was the Securities Industry Business Continuity Group, and we did a test we would have tested flooding, and we tested lots of different crises. But one of the things was a pandemic. We talked about it's in the air. We talked about masking. We talked about all those things. All those things went into it. These are the things you do. We knew. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in some of those meetings, because I just don't understand it.
Absolutely. Right. So next question is, what is long COVID to you as a long COVID patient and part of the leadership team of a long COVID advocacy in Ireland?
I did have a long thing, but I think Ciara and all the previous presenters have gone into what is long COVID, the different guidelines, the disparity between the guidelines. So I'm going to look at it from a patient perspective, and I'm going to say my experience and my personal experience. So from the perspective of long COVID advocacy Ireland, we strive to prevent others from suffering from it. So that's our main thing. It's about awareness and stopping, or at least making people aware, making people knowledgeable, putting pressure on people who can make it more visible that it exists and the damage that it causes. I would say that it's episodic in nature. The episodes are crippling, and anyone can be effective. It doesn't discriminate. That's one thing about long COVID, is it's very egalitarian. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mind. It can affect anyone. My journey began in March 2020 when I returned to Ireland from the UK to visit my parents. I was supposed to go back later that month, but I became ill a few days before my flight, and I isolated. I was like, yeah, I've got something, I've got this. Breathlessness, coughing, indigestion, belching, abdominal and leg swelling, tender skin, appetite loss, altered bowel movements, weight loss. My weight dropped from 59 kilograms to 44. I had restless sleep, I was living and existing on a garden lounger near an open window for 4 months. That was my reality. Steroids and PPIs were prescribed. Breathing felt unnatural, as if my autonomic system, which I discovered I had never heard of it before, was assaulted. Nosebleeds, hair loss, pulsating veins, struggling to breathe or swallow, joint pain, vertigo, dysbiosis, inflammation, brain fog, word finding issues, histamine sensitivity, burning sensation, distended stomach, drastic weight loss, diarrhea, constipation, furnace-like gut, surviving on bland foods for 12 months. Stiffness, osteopenia, flashing lights, fatigue, post-exertional malaise, overwhelming exhaustion, unable to lift my head, inflammation, struggling with basic tasks, needing a walking stick. Endless doctor visits, knowing more than the specialist, dealing with disbelief, tests for various conditions, seeking alternative therapy, supplements, lifestyle changes, a chemist at my kitchen sink, exhausted. When will it end? Experimenting with tinctures, cold water therapy, compression gear, oxygen chambers, and numerous diets, forgetting words, conversations, losing myself.
Thank you for sharing this. So the next question is, what key gaps do you believe were or are in the government's response in Ireland?
Well, initially, the long-term health consequences from a virus. So that must be understood as a core part of any pandemic and its legacy. And as such, risk registers and prevention measures should be put squarely at its centre as an impact. Also transmission modes and the education around prevention, protection, mitigations, or the lack of within healthcare, and within any area, be it education, be it a business, as like it's kind of a top-down approach to anywhere where people gather, where people go for care. They need to be made aware. And part of the issue is they're not aware. And when crisis and preparedness teams are only evaluating the acute impact of the virus, they're not observing and looking beyond that at the ongoing health impact and the needs, the prolonged pandemic, examining uptick data, recognizing and learning from these experiences critical to improve current supports for those affected and strengthen Ireland's preparedness for future public health crisis. Communication. was a big issue. In Ireland, it did not consistently incorporate long COVID risks as a central component of infection risk during key policy phases, including periods of reopening and the relaxation of population-level mitigation measures. As a result, the vast majority of the general public were not and are still not fully informed about the potential long-term health consequences associated with infection when making personal risk decisions. And the vast majority of mitigations were lifted in 2022 and risk management shifted progressively onto individuals. However, the risk of long-term health consequences following infection were not adequately communicated. Public messaging continued to focus heavily on hand washing, personal responsibility, and protecting the elderly and vulnerable. And the framing did not reflect emerging evidence that COVID-19 carries risks across all age groups, nor that the health impacts of infection may be cumulative, with repeated infections increasing the likelihood of adverse outcomes, including long COVID. As a result, many individuals were left to make personal decisions without exposure, without being provided with clear evidence-based information about potential long-term risk to themselves or others. And then from late 2020 onward, vaccination became increasingly framed as the primary pathway out of the pandemic, with comparatively less emphasis placed on the continued importance of layered mitigations measures, such as ventilation, filtration, masking, and transmission reduction. Public messaging at times contributed to the perception that vaccines alone would provide comprehensive protection, including against infection and onward transmission. For example, in August 21, the then HSE CEO stated publicly, I think he even tweeted it, that 88% of adults were fully protected following vaccination uptake. The use of language such as fully protected, and I don't think he was alone. I think other people did the same thing in other countries. They used the wrong words, they gave an impression, and words matter. So that risked reinforcing the misunderstanding among the public that vaccines were capable of preventing infection entirely at a time when emerging evidence was already demonstrating breakthrough infections and waning protection against transmission, particularly with the emergence of new variants. This communication framing has had catastrophic downstream consequences. It's contributed to the widespread vax and relax perception, but then it's also contributed to people thinking that they could vax and relax. And then when they got breakthrough infections, thinking, well, the vaccines don't work, because they were told they would be completely protected. So there are other things, like I have many questions. I would love to get them all in a room and fire questions at them. But the kinds of questions like I have, and they're currently kicking off an evaluation of their decision making in the first 2 years. They're not doing a post-mortem. They're not doing a review, so to speak. They're doing a closed doors evaluation. So I would ask the following questions. Why were airborne precautions sidelined despite historical evidence as such from US, China, Europe in 2020 and 2021 showing respiratory particles stay airborne from minutes to hours? Why was ventilation and filtration solutions discussed early on shelved? The Minister for Health and the Minister of Education both said 2021-22 that they would look at filtration and ventilation. Never happened. Why was a letter from 200 aerosol scientists warning the WHO of indoor airborne transmission not considered, especially considering that shortly after the letter was published in July 2020, the WHO acknowledged the emerging evidence of airborne spread in specific crowded and poorly ventilated indoor settings? Why were decisions impacting children seemingly made without questioning the mild or limited transmission narrative? Why was no research requested by the government within hospital and care homes or school settings on transmission? Why was layered precautionary approach sidestepped? And why vaccination and hand washing was and continues to be the main prevention focus?
Right. We've experienced all of that in this country as well, unfortunately. And as you said, the gap in communication was what was a major killer in the early pandemic.
Yeah, it drove so many assumptions and so many behaviors.
Absolutely.
that increased transmission, and people, if people had known, because I do think people in a crisis, when they're given all the information, they ultimately generally will make the right decisions. But the problem here was they've never been, and they still haven't been given all the right information.
That's absolutely correct. So you kind of have answered the next question. So I'm going to jump to the question after that, which is, why is it important to have support groups and grassroots awareness campaigns?
As it stands now, though it does vary country to country, generally awareness of long COVID amongst clinicians is still very poor. Patients' reports tell us that the majority of people with long COVID receive a diagnosis after they themselves suggest long COVID as a possibility based on their own research. Had they relied on their doctor's knowledge, they would likely have gone undiagnosed, had a very delayed diagnosis, and delayed diagnosis affects outcomes. So grassroots awareness campaigns and support groups ensure those who suspect that they may have long COVID have the crucial info they need regarding signs and symptoms of the condition. They also provide information on day-to-day management of the conditions, which is often unavailable with many clinicians, whilst we encourage all patients to be aware of the possibility of misinformation and to double check within the community. It's been invaluable and resources for the majority of patients in terms of gathering information about their conditions, signposting to resources, etc. So I would say patient support groups offer essential peer-to-peer emotional support for patients with an illness where feelings of extreme isolation are common, medical gaslighting is common, and an illness where stigma in society is enormous.
Absolutely, incredibly important. So the next question is, there are over 200 reported long COVID symptoms. What are the most common symptoms patients are reporting in your experience?
Now, today on our Long COVID Advocacy Ireland Instagram, we put up what are your day-to-day symptoms you're most often. So it's worth taking a look at that. But the general one was fatigue. So fatigue, exhaustion, bone tiredness, someone put it up, and pains and aches and pressure on the head. But from the calls that we have a call every second Monday of the month, which is a patient call. There's profound exhaustion, PEM, cognitive impairment and sleep disturbance, inflammation, POTS, new onset autoimmune, muscle pain, headache, migraine, gastro issues, particularly constipation, and physiologically based anxiety and low mood.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And as a matter of fact, it just popped up in my feed that a jury in Nassau County has awarded almost $1 million to a patient suffering from long COVID who was fired by the university hospital here on Long Island. So it's interesting that it's finally getting into the courts and getting the attention that it needs to get as well, despite the fact that we are lagging behind in terms of treating long COVID. Patients are being branded by some healthcare provider as psychosomatic when standard blood work is unable to detect causes of their pains, dizziness, fatigue, loss of memories, and all other type of debilitating symptoms that comes with long COVID. How can patient advocate for themselves when seeking diagnosis of long COVID?
I think the most important thing is to be prepared, and often there may be pushback. In many cases, the patients may well be dealing with a doctor with far less knowledge of the condition than they have. And that's particularly if you're a number of years into your symptoms. So I'd advise patients to spend a little time beforehand to do research. So many of the advocacy organizations online share great bite-sized breakdowns that are useful ahead of going into doctor's appointments. Bring brief notes where you have documented your symptoms and the timeline of onset of symptoms, so that the onset after COVID infection is evident, or after infection is evidence. They'll be aware if you bring too much of this type of record keeping, they will likely see you as an anxious. Having reference to hand to direct the doctor to, like, the WHO, long COVID research, Nature, Lancet pages, important to reference sources that they will see as reliable. And then also explain to them that standard blood tests and other tests often come back as normal in long COVID. So this doesn't in any way rule out long COVID. And then for women of perimenopause, menopausal age and older patients, beware that they are at greater risk of their symptoms being minimized. For example, people over 60 being told that their symptoms are part of aging. This is where that timeline is important, a reduction in stigma, increased fatigue, exercise intolerance, etc. If it's due to age, is going to be gradual, not occur suddenly, and doesn't occur right after an infection.
Absolutely, and this is incredibly important. So the next question is, we're asking you to look into your crystal ball, and at the same time use the experience of your vast experience in pandemic prevention. What changes in response to a future pandemic would you recommend?
I would say finally learning the lessons of viral transmission, having the right people in the room, so experts on each impact area, inclusion of patient groups as a specific assessment team. So data. So collection of wastewater, uptick in onset of disease, uptick in medication usage, uptick in absence, uptick in working from home, listening to what patients are saying, especially where there has been a rapid onset, clear structure around risk management and how they're assessed and mitigated, clear risk and issue register with an action plan to mitigate risks, and where a decision is made to not do something, that the reason is visible and auditable and can be explained with clear decisions on communication of risk. I would suggest to people who lead, don't try to be popular. To have clear assumptions and constraints, clear what if scenario analysis, so that you do the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, and you look at the risks all the way in between. So communication of facts, not opinions or fiction, communication of knowns and unknowns. So when they said that it was not in the air, or it was, the transmission, that whole thing is, if they had said, we don't know if it's airborne, that would have been enough. That would have been better than what they did say, because what they said was wrong. But it's like, when you don't know, you say you don't know. And in actual fact, that is better than making something up to be popular or to make it, to make it more palatable. So truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth is what I would say. And even if that means that you don't know something, that's fine. It's evolving. It's a crisis. So no dumbing down of impacts, no behavioral psychologists determining how people will behave. People are generally amazing in a crisis, and they listen and adapt. If things are sanitized and then it emerges that things were not the truth, people will rebel. And that's essentially part of the problem that we have now.
Absolutely. I feel the anti-vax movement has really become emboldened by the pandemic. In particular, it just brought it to the forefront. Well, thank you so much, Pamela, for your answers. They were absolutely invaluable. Is there anything that you would like to say in the next couple of minutes that were not addressed in the questions?
There was one thing, actually, because Ciara mentioned the FODA study.
Mm-hmm.
And there was only one piece that I actually had on the FODA study, and I'm just trying to go and find it now where I had it. Oh yeah, here it is. So long COVID remains an ongoing public health challenge in Ireland. The Health Service Executive, HSE, FODA study on long COVID estimated that 16% of adult population, that's more than 650,000 adults, has had long COVID. The impact of an infection in children isn't mild, and long COVID is common, affecting up to 10 to 20% of children with a history of COVID-19. So, and obviously the significance of long COVID appearing to have overtaken asthma in America as a predominant childhood illness for hundreds of thousands of people across Ireland has resulted in long-term disability, loss of employment, financial hardship, and social isolation. Yet patients have frequently encountered barriers to recognition, diagnosis, treatment, and social supports. And one other thing I would say is that I share the kind of the chairing of the group, the call that we have every month. And there was one person on the call recently who had most probably contracted long COVID in 2020, 2021. And the only way she got a diagnosis, she had tried lots of different treatments, and she'd been up and down, and she fed her symptoms into AI. And like I kind of feel that if AI had been what it is now 4 years ago, more people would have been diagnosed with long COVID. And that's a sad reflection on our healthcare systems, or on the response to, and by no means there are fabulous doctors. My own doctor has been brilliant, but we hear a lot of people's stories, and they're not, they haven't been good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been horrendous for patients to have access to even the minimal amount of care, because it starts with doctors not believing the patient. So thank you so much, Pamela, for all of this amazing information. If you would like to drop a link to the advocacy group in the chat, that it would be really good. And thank you for being with us at such late hour.
You're welcome.
Dr. Perego, if you are able to join us now.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Oh, fantastic. My apologies for before. I think I enter Zoom through the...
We're very, very happy to have you. So Dr. Elisa Perego is a researcher and disability activist. She survived COVID in the early pandemic epicenter of Lombardy, Italy. Since then, she has been advocating for the recognition of the long-term health effect of SARS-CoV-2 infection. She is very famous because she coined the term long COVID. She wrote some of the first publications in the world on long COVID as a disease entity and a patient-led advocacy movement. She is a member of the International Federation Long COVID Rise Up and a honorary research fellow at University College London in the United Kingdom. She spoke virtually for many institutions on long COVID, including the US National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, NASM, and the European Commission of the European Union. Thank you very much, Dr. Perego, for joining us. We are honored to have you. And I'm going to go straight into the first question. Go straight. What is long COVID to you?
For me, long COVID is the disease entity triggered and potentially driven from SARS-CoV-2 infection. It is also a term which can be used to cover the long-term symptoms, clinical signs, in sequelae, long-term health effects of SARS-CoV-2 infection again. And in some cases, it can be used as a sort of an umbrella term to include all the conditions which can be triggered by COVID-19, including some conditions which technically meet the clinical case definition for conditions which already existed before the pandemic, such as, for example, diabetes, to make just a very simple example, but which can present with COVID-19 specific features after being triggered by SARS-CoV-2. And I can also use the term to indicate the advocacy and research movement which brought into the light and into basically the public discourse long COVID itself. So for me, it has quite a few meanings, but basically this is the long-term disease process which starts with infection, with SARS-CoV-2 infection, and goes to the later sequelae.
Absolutely, the very complex pathogenesis of long
Absolutely.
COVID. So the next question is, what motivated you to create the term long COVID?
This is very complex.
It's long and it's COVID.
Because,
Yeah.
yeah, of course. I want to give you like a little snapshot of my life at the time, which,
Yes, please.
because I coined the hashtag #LongCovid on the 20th of May, 2020. And some years later, I was looking at chats with colleagues and researchers and friends, which I had at the time, no? Years later, no? And I found this chat, WhatsApp chat with a colleague, which happened the day after I coined the hashtag. And this colleague of mine, the chat was in Italian, the colleague was Italian, and the person was following me on Twitter, where I coined the hashtag #LongCovid. And they told me, why do you spend so much time on Twitter speaking about this thing? No? And I answer, well, I think people don't understand what's going on. They don't get how big this thing is. And I think this really strongly motivated me to getting involved in advocacy, because as we mentioned at the beginning of this session, I was in the early epicenter of Lombardy here. I was infected before the lockdown, before even we knew the virus was here. I saw the virus completely hammering and destroying our healthcare system. And many people I knew in my neighborhood, including myself, some people died in the hospital. Many people were left at home with no medical care, despite being in life-threatening condition with COVID pneumonia, because the hospital were completely gone. And I was hearing from people that they were not recovering, not one people, not two people. It was, completely a disaster. It was shocking and a complete disaster. And I was myself very ill, like in life-threatening condition with my oxygen saturation already beyond the acute phases, dropping to life-threatening levels such as in the 80%. No? And, from a scientific point of view, there are many reasons why I use the term #LongCovid, but really from a very personal live experience, embodied experience of what it was going on. I'm a very shy person, very introverted person, but I was there. People in the UK were saying no to lockdowns. People in the other countries were not understanding what was going on, because obviously many people were infected later than us in Lombardy. I was infected in February 2020, so I was sort of ahead of the curve. And I understood that we really needed something to come together. We really needed to push to recognize this, because it was not talk about, there was no recognition of what public recognition, especially in the public, about the extent of the disaster. So scientifically, there are many reasons why I choose this specific name, including the prolonged disease process, But I wanted to start with this personal episode, this small WhatsApp message, which I found. I forgot about this. I found it about this years later. It was really, people didn't understand what was going on, how many people were sick, how many people were at home in life-threatening condition, and there was this disease entity, and it was not being recognized appropriately.
Well, thank you so much for that, and this is so important that we're getting this first-hand experience from you about why you actually created the term. So the next question is, why is the term long COVID needed today? after an estimated 400 million people continue to suffer from long COVID.
Okay, one reason I would say because 400 million people suffer from long COVID or are supposed to have suffered in the past. Some might have died in the first wave and so on. But yeah, the disease is such a huge problem that it still needs a name. It still needs a name which link the sequelae to the original infection. We need a simple term, such as long COVID, which can help us also to count all of these sequelae. And I think the term is, as I said, also with co-authors in some of the early publication of 2020 is very malleable, so you can use to include all the sequelae. It's very important epidemiologically to count all the long-term effects from SARS-CoV-2 infection. I think it describes very well scientifically what we see in biomedical research, because okay, you can say, oh, long COVID, very simple term, but actually, COVID itself is very heterogeneous disease. Long COVID is the prolongation of this process, which starts already in acute COVID, and it's very heterogeneous and complex already in acute COVID. So this idea of long COVID covers, can help to cover and count all the sequelae, and also point, to shed light on disease processes, microvascular dysfunction, coagulation process, whatever, inflammation, etc., which start already in the acute phase of the infection and goes on, and obviously morph and evolve so long. This idea of a disease which moves and evolves in time, longitudinally across the body and across time.
Absolutely, and also a name that's very impactful and easy for people to get.
I think it's good both scientifically and to capture, the attention of people.
Absolutely. So the next question is, why should researchers study long COVID as a distinctive condition following an infection of SARS-CoV-2 instead of studying long COVID as a post-viral infection syndrome that could have a wide range of viruses as a root cause?
When I was a little child, I got probably from my mother herpes viruses 1, the labial one, and sometimes it wakes up and you get the famous cold sores. No? And when I get this, obviously I get a specific cream to put on the cold sores on the lips, and I don't get medication for HIV/AIDS. Why? Because this virus is not HIV. A few years ago I got norovirus, and I was ill for quite a lot of time. I didn't recover immediately, but I didn't get the sequelae of COVID pneumonia after a norovirus infection. If you get, diseases triggered by by bacteria, you get antibiotics, you don't get antivirals, and so on. So a very simple answer. The etiology, what causes the disease, is very important to shed a light on the pathobiology, pathophysiology, and how to cure the disease. Obviously, I made a few examples based on the persistence of the pathogens. Even if in case there is no viral persistence of SARS-CoV-2 in all patients with long COVID, you can still have sequelae which you don't get, for example, from norovirus. For example, with norovirus, as long as I know, you generally don't get lung damage, for example. So it's very important to pinpoint the pathophysiology, because it can give you clues on how to treat the disease or now classified disease. For example, with COVID, just another example also from my personal experience, you can get cardiovascular sequelae, cardiovascular problem also in people who are generally considered too young in women. For example, in Italy, it's much uncommon for youngish women to get severe cardiovascular disease, but with COVID you can get this. And obviously this happened to me also at the beginning of the pandemic. The doctors were not, how it's possible that you youngish women have this kind of sequelae. But unfortunately with COVID we can have this kind of problems also in children. So to summarize, different pathogens obviously can have something in common. I don't know, disruption of the immune system, chronic inflammation, neuroinflammation on a broader level. But there are also differences between pathogens on average. And it is very important to pinpoint these differences because obviously this can give clues on how to treat this pathogen, on how to identify the patient population more at risk of certain sequelae. For example, as I mentioned, women and children with cardiovascular disease, which is less common than with other pathogen, and so on. Also, I have to say that when many scientists speak of these post-viral syndromes in general, these terms we are now hearing PICE, post-acute or infection associated, they often speak about using these terms like, okay, fatigue, brain fog, it's mysterious, we don't know what's going on. So it pushes, it's not the problem of speaking about post-infectious diseases in general as a category, but there is this push to consider these diseases, these syndromes, let's say, in this school of thought as something vague, some fatigue, some brain fog. All these pathogens lead to this fatigue, to this brain fog. And while we need to go to the root of the problem, whatever it's viral persistence, bacterial persistence, and all the other mechanisms which we can find. The clear example is HIV/AIDS. They pinpointed the root cause and they found at least a way to keep the disease at bay. The same with the diseases triggered by bacteria. You get antibiotics and in many cases, you can keep the disease under control. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. The next question is going to be about airborne precautions. So some medical experts say that COVID doesn't warrant airborne precautions in healthcare because people can get vaccinated. Yay. Do vaccinations remove the risk of long COVID and death?
No, I've heard also some of
I'm sure I'm triggering you. But
yeah, of course. No, as other people who have spoken today have said, obviously vaccination can give, according to the studies, can give you some protection against severe illness and probably also against developing long COVID. However, vaccination against COVID doesn't prevent even death in some cases, because I could cite you publication of case studies and case series of patients who were fully vaccinated and died from COVID, and it doesn't prevent long COVID in all cases. Obviously, it's very difficult to pinpoint the number, the prevalence of long COVID post-vaccination, because now the data are not super. Also, there is another problem. We all are aware of this, that basically vaccination is not tailored to the latest variants. And also we have this variant super, as someone call it. So there are many variants at the same time in the world. So vaccination is getting probably less and less good. Also, many people don't get boosted. Of course, many people are getting infected. Maybe there is some protection. Let's say protection. It's not the right word. But yeah, there is some sort of immunity. But it doesn't, you can still get COVID and die today. There was this study which was published a few weeks ago in JAMA, which estimated that between 2022 and 2024, around 200,000 people died from COVID in the United States alone, with 2 million hospitalization estimated for this 2 years period. And it's a period from when we have vaccination. So COVID remains absolutely a threat, and therefore caution obviously are critical to try to avoid infection as much as possible. And also, as I think someone else already mentioned this, but there are many other pathogens which are clearly known to be airborne, such as the measles virus, but also probably the influenza virus, etc. So airborne precaution, especially in healthcare setting, could really help to prevent a lot of disease beyond COVID-19. Would be really important for public health.
Yes, absolutely. This has been a huge problem here. The lack of booster intake has been, of course, dismal, and of course, with the current administration, we've had a total change into the vaccination schedules. So, infectious disease are living their best lives right now. So the next question is, what are the stigmas long COVID patients face in seeking care?
Okay, I think there might be various studies conducted, for example, by interviewing patients, have shown various challenges that the patient face. And I wanted also to say that this probably is also maybe country specific, because I live in different countries, before the final tragedy of the pandemic, let's say. And I was already chronically ill, and I've noticed living in the UK, in Austria, and obviously in my native Italy, where I am now, that there is a huge disparity in which medicine treats chronic diseases. And I've noticed, for example, in the UK and in Austria, the situation was much worse than in Italy. So probably, maybe what I'm going to say, it's not valid for everyone, for every country, for every group. But one thing that I've noticed in my native Italy and in the first wave was that people didn't want to admit to have got COVID, because there was a huge stigma on COVID here, because as I mentioned, I was in Lombardy, the early COVID epicenter, so it was a disaster, so many people dying, and this was very, very shocking for people. So many people didn't want to say they had COVID and they might have infected other people. Actually, I'm one of the few people I know, although I'm basically homebound, so I don't meet many people, but I'm one of the few people who admit openly to have had COVID and to have long COVID among the people I know. So this is a problem, and not wanting to admit to have had COVID. And now there is a further challenge here, because obviously we are trying to remove COVID from the conversation. It's a taboo in society. So obviously, if you are not going to admit to have COVID, you can say, okay, I have long COVID. Then there are stigmas linked to having a chronic illness, which is unfortunately a big problem in medicine and in healthcare. As I mentioned, I suffered from multiple chronic illness from before the pandemic as well, from before long COVID. So this is something I experience myself, a lot of wrong diagnosis across my life, which resulted in disability. So I think, there is a big problem in medicine about this. And then I think there are problems about the very same stigmatization of long COVID specifically when framed as a disease with no biomarkers, maybe psychological, a disease which might not be real. And this, I think, is especially common in certain countries, from what I say, such as the UK, possibly. And for my own experience, for example, I'm diagnosed with long COVID, and in my case, it was not a stigma like it's psychological or whatever, because doctor always recognize I had it. But I think there is also, how to frame this, like doctors don't want to admit how severe this thing is, how costly this thing is, how many scans you should get, how many medication, how many doctors you should see, the fact that maybe they left you at home with no medical care in the acute phase, they didn't send the ambulance, and I had this hesitation, but I wonder if there is, because I wonder if there is maybe some order from the top of, of not recognizing the disease and pushing for it's psychological, it's not so serious, let's not get the scan you need, maybe the chest pain is a pulled muscle, this happened to me, the chest pain still here after 6 years. And this kind of, so there is a very complex panorama, let's say, background, chronic illness stigma related to long COVID, stigma related to the pandemic. And this latest stigma, I think it's very specific to long COVID. Something related to the COVID pandemic and refusing to recognizing the COVID pandemic. And I see this with myself because often I can speak with other people about my previous chronic disease and people are fine with that. But it's more difficult to speak with some people about long COVID because they can say, the pandemic, no, there is no COVID, is dead. Is COVID still here, etc., etc. So this is very specific, I think, different from other illnesses.
Yes, and we also find that this stigmas and gaslighting goes together for both long COVID and chronic diseases, unfortunately. So I'm going to jump to the last question, and if that's okay, can I merge the question 8 and question 9? So the next question is, what are the pros and cons for excluding patients with COVID-induced organ diseases from long COVID studies? This refers particularly to Don Goldberg's study where he proposed in a review that long COVID should be limited to patients with multiple persistent symptoms not related to well-defined organ damage. As the creator of the term long COVID, can you describe how long COVID being restricted as a mysterious cluster of unexplained chronic symptoms affect patients who cannot recover from damages to their organ system and body functions?
First of all, I have to say that I strongly and completely disagree with this idea of pushing long COVID in the realm of a mysterious disease, something we cannot explain, there is no test, there is no biomarker, a disease with no biomarkers. I strongly disagree. I think there is a push, maybe even economical push to not give a patient the scan, the medication, because obviously, as I wrote in publication, I still wrote in 2020, this thing is going to be, the costs are going to be unfathomable. We use not so big, we cannot even count them. And obviously, there is this need to say it's mysterious, we can treat, we can't give you the scan, there is no evidence, etc. So there is obviously, I think there is a problem of cutting costs, and I think there might be a push in this sense from insurance company, whatever. But obviously, this is an opinion. Let's not go on about this for now. I read the article you sent me about this professor. I disagree with the article. There are many incorrect claims in the articles. And there is, I want to say, also a problem about understanding long COVID, because in their views, apart from this idea of breaking patient like organ damage, mysterious symptoms like dichotomy is wrong. But, these efforts, like misunderstanding what COVID is, because COVID is not you get the virus. Okay, sorry for my dark humor, let's say. Your lung explode the first day of the disease, you get fibrosis, and then the disease ended. Or no, you don't have a problem with your lung, but you continue to have this mysterious fatigue. The disease doesn't work like this, because we know that even organ damage, even damage to the lung, it's a long process. It's something which goes on. Also, he mentioned fibrosis, I think, and I think pulmonary fibrosis is progressive disease, so it's not something it happens one day, and then the disease stops. It's not like that. Many also, I don't know if we can really say, at the molecular level, at the cellular level, at the subcellular level, when you do very detailed tests, and unfortunately, when you do autopsy, which is basically the only and very final test to really show if you have long COVID, if you had organ damage, you see the damage, even in people, in individuals who might have very mild symptoms. So it's very complicated, because also the doctor, the professor you mentioned, also think that hospitalized patients necessarily have organ damage. People who were at home don't, but it's not so simple. People who were very ill could have been left at home, while people who were more lucky, and there are publications on this, were in the hospital. So you create a very artificial division, very artificial samples. You can't really take all the disease like this. You can, of course, if you want to do a clinical trial study, set for that specific study and that specific clinical trial exclusion and inclusion criteria. For example, you want to do a study on long COVID and diabetes. Obviously, you will take up people with diabetes and long COVID and exclude the others. But you can't say like this person does, that people who are hospitalized have a disease and people who are not hospitalized have a completely different disease. This is completely wrong, because we have research studies, biomedical studies, case series, people like myself who are left at home in the acute phase with severe disease, who have the disease you can also see in severe patients, for example, desaturation, coagulation problems, etc., etc. Obviously, COVID and long COVID are very heterogeneous diseases. As we said, entities, as we said at the beginning. So if you want to treat, if you want to design clinical trials and experiments, you need a very subtle, very sophisticated way of discriminating between patients. But you can't a priori say, hospitalized patients are something, organ damage is separated from symptoms. If you have fatigue and you are a woman, then you don't have organ damage, etc. It's a very simplistic way to see things. It is scientifically wrong, as proven by multiple studies. And obviously, unfortunately, I fear that this narrative suits is helpful maybe to insurance companies, to healthcare who don't want to pay, employers who don't want to give disability benefits, etc. It's a very dangerous narrative, and I completely oppose this. It's not scientific.
Same. Absolutely. I think we're going to have to stop here for our next speaker, but I would like to thank you, Dr. Perego, for being with us and give us your insights about long COVID and for creating the term long COVID. Thank you very, very much. We look forward to speaking to you again. If there is anything that wasn't covered, please mention it now.
No, I think it's fine. I hope I didn't speak too much and I took too much of your time also with the problem with the mic before. I want to thank everyone for coming and you all for the very kind invitation and very interesting question. It was a great pleasure to be with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perego.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move to Dr. Robi, who is going to introduce our next speakers. Hi, Dr. Robi.
Hi, Dr. Perego. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for everything in the work. You're welcome.
Absolutely. You're very, very welcome. Well, I would like, and thank you, Dr. Corthals, for being the MC on those last two presenters. What a marvelous job they both did. Everyone's doing a wonderful job, frankly. So I would like to introduce Angela. And Angela is a lifelong community builder turned advocate activist. Before COVID, she devoted her life to being there for others, raising her children, caring for people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, volunteering in schools, and serving on the PTA board. She thrived on party planning and bringing people together. She loved attending concerts, sporting events, and traveling. COVID upended everything in 2020 when Angela's family was infected. She developed long COVID and lost much of her ability to care for herself for years. Both of her children also developed long COVID at ages 8 and 10. Among their different symptoms, her daughter now lives with vision issues, and in 2024, her son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, despite no family history. Though still not better and in bed much of the time, some things have improved while others have worsened. Angela has slowly regained pieces of strength over the years, and she made a promise that if she could push at all, she would show up for others the way many in the long COVID community showed up for her. That promise led to hosting a Zoom call that allowed people with long COVID to support one another. And in 2023, to create International Long COVID Awareness Day, along with the global long COVID community and the founding of International Long COVID Awareness, ILCA. Angela is a strong proponent of masking, especially masking in all healthcare settings globally, clean air for schools and public spaces, pandemic prevention, and actively pushes back against the erasure of long COVID and anything that diminishes the urgency of the ongoing pandemic. Please welcome Angela.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Dr. Robi.
Hello.
I know what my first question is, but I didn't want to jump in with it.
Well, I'm ready to ask your first question. What is long COVID to you, Angela.
First, I just want to say you made me a little bit emotional, and everybody that knows me knows I get really emotional, especially when I talk about long COVID. Long COVID to me is horrific, hellish misery. That is what it is to me. My kids are going through this. Long COVID is a thief of life. It's a destroyer of dreams and futures. It's consuming. It's isolating. It's a disease that if you have it, you hate it. And it's a disease that if you don't have it, you don't want it, because it will tear your life apart. Lots of people like to tell me that chronic illness doesn't destroy your life. Long COVID has destroyed my life. It's impacted everything, including my friendships, my life with my family, my dad, because it's been so stigmatized and politicized. So it consumes your life. I cannot work. I can barely take care of my kids. And it is taking my life away from me. I've been sick for 6 years. I got sick on February 18th of 2020. The fatigue came rolling in, the migraine that has not left, except for when I got a booster at one point. It left for a little bit and came back. So here I am, still in a migraine state. That's why I have these glasses on, and I have to wear sunglasses a lot. I can't stand the light as much, and I love the sunlight, so it's very difficult for me. So 6 years of my life is gone. 6 years that I had that I could spend with my children has been taken away. I see them, we live together, I see them, but it's not very much because I spend most of my time in bed. So as you said, I did improve a little bit, but I want to be very clear that my life is very low quality still, but it's not as severe as it used to be. I consider myself a little bit lucky that I've improved enough to do some of the things like doing ILCA, but my fatigue is still pretty heavy. I stay really dizzy, and my migraine does not leave. My kids are today 14 and 16. As you mentioned in the introduction, they were 8 and 10. My daughter just turned 10. She just recently, 2 days ago, turned 16. They've been sick that long. The governments are not helping. Healthcare doesn't know what to do. 6 years of our lives for the 3 of us. And then also our extended family is going through health battles that we know are related to COVID. They've been infected between 3 to 11 times now over the years, maybe more. Nobody's testing, so nobody would know for sure. So when you ask me what long COVID is, that's what it is. It's the hellish misery that we're all going through. You mentioned that my son has type 1 diabetes. He's actually treating a low right now. So right before I was coming on, we're dealing with that. We spend a lot of nights up awake between my symptoms and him having to treat lows in the middle of the night. It is really miserable. We're drained. We don't feel that anybody understands the urgency. And we know that just our neighbors down the street are going through the same thing. We know that there's millions of other people, hundreds of millions of people going through this. Long COVID is a human issue. Long COVID is a workplace issue. Long COVID is an economic issue. Long COVID is a healthcare issue, and it's an international issue that needs to be recognized and addressed by our world governments and public health and healthcare. As I say all the time, long COVID is long COVID, because people like to try and change it into something else. It isn't anything else. We got sick from COVID in 2020. We have long COVID. That's what long COVID is to me.
Thank you so much, Angela. I am so touched by hearing your story again. And you have really done a beautiful job sharing with everyone here today what you've been going through and what your entire family has been going through. And I have so much empathy for you and stand with you as a long COVID survivor myself. And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing this with everyone. I'd like to ask you another question. What motivated you to choose March 15th and create the Long COVID Awareness Day in 2023, now very widely recognized by patients, allies, as well as the NIH RECOVER?
Well, I didn't choose the 15th. I wouldn't have chose the same month that my daughter was born in. I can tell you that because it makes it very hectic. In 2021, I felt that there was already so many of us. I was part of the body politic support group where everybody gathered on Slack. And I had joined that in 2020. But in 2021, I thought that if we had some maybe colors or a message or something that could help people identify us, because there were so many of us, but when you go online, everybody's kind of scattered. People claim that they have different illnesses, even though they say they had COVID. So then it makes it even more scattered. So it's really hard to tell who is who and who you can identify with. And for people that don't know that they have long COVID, it would make that harder for them to understand that that's what they were going through too. So like I said, in 2021, I was still pretty sick to the point that I was stuck in bed and couldn't like be on the computer or do anything. So I'm really emotional right now. I did not know I was going to get this emotional listening to all of you and being here. I decided that, like you said, I would, if I got betterish, I would help to try and do something. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. But when I got betterish, 2022 is about when I started to get betterish because I got reinfected and I was on Paxlovid and all kinds of medicines, and my baseline started to improve a little bit over those months. And by January 2023, I started sending out polls to the patient community on like X and Facebook and everywhere that I could. And I'm not a social media person. I can't stand social media, as most people know, but I had to do it. I had to spread the survey all over through the support groups, through different organizations, and I met many of you through doing that in 2023. So, and this was a very fast moving thing. So that started January 2023, and pretty much ILCA started in February 2023. So what happened was, from the survey polls that we were doing, I was trying to gather what colors people wanted to do. I knew we needed a tricolor ribbon because there were so many awareness ribbons already that already were assigned to different diseases and syndromes and things like that. So I figured we need a tricolor ribbon so that we're different from everybody else enough for at least a little bit, because there's only so many colors and too many diseases. And we ended up doing a tricolor ribbon, and it ended up being that the community globally chose teal, gray, and black as our colors to represent long COVID. And I will just tell you what the colors represent real quick, because I think it's important to acknowledge why people chose these colors for long COVID. So the teal represents hope and support. The gray represents the loss and the grief. And black represents the loneliness and the isolation that comes with long COVID, which I feel is very valid. I feel that those colors being chosen were perfect. I honestly wanted yellow. Most people know I wanted yellow, but I was like, the community chose this, so this is what we're doing. March 15th was chose as the day. I'm not really for sure, but I know a lot of people that got infected that day on March 15th. And also, obviously, the month was chosen because that was like lockdowns. That was the month that a lot of people got infected. That's when all of our lives, for sure, if they weren't already messed up like mine in February 18 and like starting to be destroyed, then in March, a lot of people were impacted globally. So that's why people chose that day. And the colors and the month is everything that you all know as International Long COVID Awareness. And I know that you also asked as part of that question, what my hope was, the vision. And my hope in 2023 was that the awareness campaign would make the impacts of long COVID more visible to those outside our community, and also help those who may not yet know that they were suffering from this disease to figure out that this may be what's going on with them, and to link up with others in our community to start talking and finding out like what people were doing and how they were handling things, and just be kind of a community support for those that are new to having long COVID. And that still remains to be my hope and vision going futuristically, even today in 2026. I know there's a lot of differences in our groups. There's a lot of tensions, and I'm not really a person for a lot of drama, maybe in high school, but not as a mom and not as a person who is sick. I'm kind of holding myself up right now because I'm a little bit tired because listening to this whole thing, and I wanted to hear everybody speak, but also my emotions like drain me so much. And then having to be alert and on camera reading and I have to keep notes. And I'm sorry to everyone having to deal with me reading off of here because I forget a lot still. And I'm really trying to just kind of go with the vibe of this. So that is why we have March as our month and March 15th is the day. And I think that it is a good thing that we have the awareness. It's a lot of stress for all of us that plan during the month and before all the months that go into preparing it. But I know that people's hearts are that they just want us to get help and treatments. And so many of us are clinging to that hope that by making people more aware of what's going on, that we will get there. People hearing our stories, people sharing, just right now we're in the month and we're doing the implications of COVID and long COVID on the cardiovascular health. And to me, that's so important today because we've been reading and seeing so many studies and articles that reflect on cardiovascular health. So that's where we're at right now. And next year, we're already talking about things this month for next year for 2027, which feels really weird to say. For like a theme and things like that. And if any of you listening have ideas, you can always reach out. And I think Julie will link everything to how to reach me, so I don't have to leave it out here because it's hard for me to just come off the top of my head with it. But I will say that you can find out information about the calendar for Long COVID Awareness Month, week, day, all of the ongoing things from different groups and from all of us that are networking together at longcovidawareness.life. And you can feel free to message if you have any ideas, because we all want to consider the voices of the community. That's what's important. And yeah. That's it for that one. I'm sorry it was a long answer. I didn't think that one was going to be so long, but I feel like that's actually really important right now as we're in the month.
Absolutely. Wonderful answers. And I love how you blended those two questions together. So I'd like to ask you about the 3 elections that we've had in this pandemic. And what do you think are the main differences between Presidents Trump and Biden in addressing long COVID as a national crisis?
Ooh, this one's a tough one because I don't really like the political stuff. I am not a fan of what has been going on, obviously, as many are not. I know some people may really love Trump and some people might really love Biden and some people might really hate them both. So I want to be very careful with addressing this because everybody is so opinionated about how they feel. I would imagine, I know the people here are probably leaning one way, but I'm not for sure. So I'm going to talk to all of you as if we're all just one people. So if anybody hates me after this, it's okay. First, I think that the issues with, it's hard because Trump was elected while we were all sick. So I'm going to be very honest that I have my own feelings that Trump was our president then. And it was very difficult for me and my family because of the handling of the pandemic in the beginning. For us to be so sick and nothing was being done. We have a lot of opinions. It doesn't mean that we think Biden did better because the let it rip came, right? So there's a lot to this. Under President Trump, the attention I feel was mostly on the immediate crisis. He told us it was going to be over by Easter, I believe, was one of the things he kept pushing to all of us. And obviously, we are about to approach another Easter in just a couple of weeks. We've been doing this for 6 years. It is a lot. It is draining. So I just want to remind you that this is where I'm coming from. And if this bothers anybody, I almost told Julie I didn't want to answer this question because I don't want people to be upset. But what I would say is I feel that Trump was trying to address the immediate part of the crisis. And then he did the push for the vaccines with the Operation Warp Speed, and that all happened. And it did help to accelerate the vaccines quickly, but as we all know, there's been reports of so many people being vaccine injured, and that's a big problem. And I'm not a person who pushes for the vaccines because my booster was the one that made it where I couldn't walk for 15 hours. And then I don't tell people to not get the vaccine because it can save lives. So I think it's important that we have to weigh the pros and cons, and each person has to make their decision for themselves and their families. But I also know that we have to do what is best for the community around us and for the world. And so vaccinating for lots of different diseases, illnesses that have been around for a long time is important, as we know with measles that is happening right now. So going back to your question, besides the vaccines, I'm going to go on to with Biden. So I'm going to get a little bit into this, and you guys can cut me off if you need to. But beyond the vaccines, I feel that there was little federal focus on what would happen after the acute infection phase. Long COVID was not treated as a national policy or an international policy at all. So there wasn't a large federal research initiative dedicated to understanding long-term symptoms, and there was no formal move to recognize long COVID within disability policy during Trump's term. And then in the emergency response, I feel that that was pretty aggressive, but the long-term consequences of COVID, being us millions that have been left with long COVID, would go on to experience these horrible symptoms with no one doing anything. And that was when Trump was there and then left. So then you got Biden coming in, and I feel that that approach was expanded significantly. His administration directed federal agencies to take long COVID seriously as an ongoing public health issue, and the National Institutes of Health launched the $1 billion for RECOVER initiative, specifically to study long COVID and its causes, its effects, and potential treatments. That was a good thing, though we know that there are some issues with that. That marked one of the first major federal research efforts dedicated entirely to long COVID. Another major shift was the formal recognition of long COVID. Long COVID was recognized as a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And that meant that people suffering from long COVID could legally qualify for workplace and school accommodations, which is so important. The administration also issued federal guidance to help employers and educators support those individuals. So the key difference looks like Trump administration was trying to focus on the emergency pandemic, and then the vaccines happened, and then Biden comes in and he kind of laid out some structure for what was happening, his administration anyway. They established more concrete policies and systems that aimed to help people with long COVID. And I feel that the Trump's administration did not make it a significant federal priority, which it should have been. I feel people that were speaking for us really pushed on that, and it didn't happen the way it should have. So, and then as we all know, well, Biden was in again, the let it rip happened, and it's been a mess ever since. And so now we have no masks, no mitigations, no testing really happening, and that's where we are today. And it's kind of scary. It's very scary because I have children who I can't even send out in the world due to what these two presidents have done. And even globally, on a bigger scale than national, we know that many of the governments have not addressed COVID and long COVID the way they should have. There's no mask in healthcare, which I know is another thing I'll bring up later on because of the next questions you're going to be asking. So I will let you continue.
Thank you for sharing your personal perspective. If we were to create a petition to our Congress, what are the policies that would ease the suffering of the long COVID community?
This one is the big one for me. It's a really important question. And the other ones are important too, but this one is really big because this is why awareness is a thing, because we need actions. And so the petition is so important to me. The policy decisions directly affect whether people get treatment, financial stability, and recognition. So first of all, respirators in healthcare, number one priority to me. If we can't have masking globally and everywhere and nationally everywhere, then at least the very, very minimum, healthcare should be masking. I don't care if it's a little doctor's office in the country or a big hospital in the city. Everybody should be wearing respirators, N95s to be exact, because I know that some people get confused when we talk about different masks and masking what's okay, but I believe that N95s to protect patients and healthcare workers both, right? It's not just about the patients, and it's not just about the immunocompromised and the vulnerable. It's about everyone, including children who are being raised up in this pandemic where they're not being taken care of. Nobody's watching over them, not even the doctors. So you go in to treat a kid or take them for a well visit and then they catch COVID, and then how is that okay? So I would say that's the first thing in the petition. I would say respirators in healthcare. And then I'm getting really wore out, but I want to finish this question because it's so important. I think that after the respirators in healthcare would probably be another huge priority would be the sustained research funding. So the National Institutes of Health launched the RECOVER initiative, and many patients and researchers argue that funding needs to be expanded and better targeted toward treatment trials. Not just data collection, and a petition could call for guaranteed multi-year funding specifically for long COVID targeted treatment development and not temporary or limited programs. Second, we would want to streamline the disability access. Long COVID, or third, disability access. Long COVID is recognized under the Americans with Disability Act, but in reality, many patients struggle to qualify for Social Security disability insurance, and the application process is long, complex, and often requires extensive documentation. Policy reform could include clear eligibility guidelines and faster review pathways for long COVID patients and less checking to maintain approval, especially if people are sick after something like 2 years. Chances are they're not all better after 6 more months. So maybe just a yearly check-in instead of doing, and I know different things require different things, but maybe you just check in a year. And it's like if you're still not doing okay, and it just depends on which part of that we're talking about. So that would be my next thing that would make things a little bit better for patients. The fourth thing would be to push for federal workplace protections. Some people with long COVID can work, but only with flexible hours, remote options, or reduced schedules. Congress could strengthen protections for reasonable accommodations, incentivize employers to offer flexibility without penalizing workers. That also includes sick time, right? People need sick time major because we are having all these illnesses running around. So we need to be able to take off of work when we're sick. And then federal grants could help establish multidisciplinary clinics in underserved rural areas, ensuring patients don't have to travel across states for care. And fifth, I'm sorry, I'm going off of another list. My list is a little scattered. Insurance reform is another one that I would say is a big one because policies could require both public and private insurers to cover long COVID evaluation, rehabilitation, and emerging treatments. To many patients, they are facing like really high out-of-pocket costs, and therapies aren't consistently covered, and they really need to be covered. So if it was a petition, I'm going to go over it real quick. It would be number 1, masks in healthcare, respirators in healthcare. Number 2, sustained research funding. Number 3, clear disability access. Number 4, workplace protection and flexibility. 5, expand clinical care access. And 6, insurance coverage and provider education would be my very final one, because I feel like we've been in this for 6 years, so I'm giving you 6 things for that petition. And I think that if we were to make for sure that there's data and education going on, that people are being updated about what is happening with long COVID, that's essential. So our healthcare workers don't know how to take care of us. They need to be told. So I think that's the biggest thing. And like I said, I could go on that topic for a long time, but I won't, because I know I already went over my time, and I'm going to let you go on to Devin.
Do you have any energy left to answer one more question?
Yes, I sure do, because I love to be here with you all. I am pumped. I know I'm going to be not okay for the rest of the night after this, but I'll be getting in bed right after I listen to the end of this.
Yes, I do expect some post-exertional malaise after you've done so much
I just
work
always
on
have
this.
fatigue. It's nonstop. It's not even that it comes on me. I'm just really tired all the time. So, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what a fabulous, really thoughtful answer to that question. So thank you for taking the time to put in such a great amount of effort to come up with such a thoughtful response. And I love how you had 6 points to go with the 6 years. That's lovely. So this will be our last question for you. The long COVID patient community is somewhat torn apart by how long COVID should be defined and studied. Some people prefer long COVID to be studied as a collection of heterogenic multi-system conditions that follow multiple etiologies from an infection of SARS-CoV-2, while others think of long COVID as a cluster of debilitating, hard to diagnose symptoms similar to ME/CFS, leaving out diagnosable conditions like loss in organ function, organ diseases like asthma, vascular diseases like blood clots, immunological dysfunction like chronic inflammation, metabolic dysfunction like diabetes or high cholesterol, and many other COVID-induced autoimmune diseases. So how does a massive exclusion criteria affect patients suffering from long COVID? And how does massive exclusion criteria affect calculation of the prevalence of long COVID?
Okay, this is going to be one that gets me in trouble with people, and that's okay. But I do want to acknowledge that I saw your telehealth one, and I totally agree on telehealth. I push for telehealth all the time, especially with no masks in healthcare. I did see that pop up on the screen. So I just want to acknowledge that. So the long COVID, this is going to be a short answer because I'm not going to go too long. A lot of people know in the community that I'm very much against like conflation with any other diseases, and so I'm going to make this very short. So the long COVID community is divided because people experience very different outcomes from COVID and long COVID. We have different symptoms. We have different things going on. Some people complain that we were doing cardiovascular health for the focus for Long COVID Awareness Month. Because maybe they're not going through those issues. A lot of people are going through the cardiovascular. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that not everybody is suffering from the same symptoms, and we all have different organ damage symptoms, also different daily things happening in our lives. So that's all going into why there is this division. So I would say that some people see long COVID is a broad multi-system condition, including organ damage, vascular problems, metabolic changes, COVID-induced autoimmune diseases. Others focus narrowly on hard-to-diagnose symptom clusters like fatigue, brain, quote, and everybody knows, fog, which I call brain damage in a lot of cases. For many of us, it's brain damage, so I don't like the word brain fog. And also you had mentioned PEM earlier, and I don't like to really call it PEM because for me it's not PEM, but for others it's a PEM what they experience. And so I think that's a really hard one because not everybody is experiencing those issues. That's why there's this division. So it's important not to conflate long COVID with pre-existing conditions like ME/CFS. SARS-CoV-2 can directly affect multiple organs. So many patients have measurable findings beyond just symptoms. again, we don't have biomarkers. So this is where this gets really tough. And I know all of you that are paying attention to this know that. This matters because how long COVID is defined, which is another important part of this, shapes research, funding, diagnosis, disability access, and treatment. And strict or narrow exclusion criteria leave out patients with organ damage or other measurable conditions. And it underestimates the prevalence, it reduces recognition, and it limits our resources. So ultimately, we need a balanced definition, which you're about to bring on Devin, and Devin's probably going to talk all about a definition, which is really important because we've all been working hard as a community to make a new definition to really, truly define and capture what long COVID is. So we need, again, a balanced definition that acknowledges both organ pathology and system clusters together, so everyone affected is counted, studied, and supported. And that's why the community is working, like I said, on the definition, but we have to create a definition that reflects the full urgency and impact of long COVID. Because if we don't do that, then how in the world are we going to get to where we need to be as a community if we're all going to be fighting about what long COVID is? And if you have long COVID, you should call it long COVID and tell people you got it from a COVID infection, because then it helps them to prevent it. When you call it something that has been a syndrome that's been around for a long time, people don't understand that they need to protect themselves from COVID. So I would just really reiterate that. And that is all I got for you.
What a magnificent job, Angela. I hope you can see all the people applauding and sending up great emojis. You've done a fantastic job, and what again, a very, very thoughtful series of replies to our questions. Thank you.
Should I just say I'm really happy to have met you today? Like, I've heard about you a lot, and I'm really happy to have got to meet you here today. And I'm so glad Julie does these so that people have the chance to meet people that they've heard about, read about, and others have talked highly about. So I just want to let you know that.
And it's nice to meet you as well, as I've heard your story before and admire the work that you've done so much. And it's nice to finally be able to see each other in real life.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Dr. Robi. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for all the preparation. It means the world to me. Both of you, actually, all of you that are here.
Julie, I love you, and thank you for what you're doing with Mask Together America. This is amazing work. Just thank you. And thank you for all the work you do for all of us. It's so much, and I know that. So just thank you.
I love you too, Angela.
Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to now introduce our next speaker. Mr. Devin Russell is the co-founder of the Long COVID Foundation. Devin's passion for chronic illness started in 2007 when he suddenly started experiencing a multitude of symptoms after an 11-year odyssey with what turned out to be chronic Lyme and chronic tick-borne co-infections. He eventually recovered. Around this time, he started managing an integrative clinic that specialized in chronic illness, where he served for 4 years. Unfortunately, he was forced to stop working at the center due to his unrelenting long COVID, which has significantly affected his life for almost 6 years now. In 2023, Devin co-founded the Long COVID Foundation to try to help those ailing with long COVID and try to prevent them from suffering the same fate as others with unsolved and unresolved chronic disease and illnesses. Thank you for joining us, Devin.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Robi, and pleasure to be here with Mask Together America.
Thrilled to have you. So let's start with our first question, Devin. What is long COVID to you?
Well, I think I can answer that in a couple different ways. So first, I'll do kind of the technical way. It's a multi-system vascular chronic disease that can affect every or almost every organ and system of the body and it can last for months or years after initial SARS-CoV-2 infection. Can cause more than 200 plus symptoms. The virus SARS-CoV-2 is persistent. The spike is persistent. Other pathogens get reactivated by the virus. There's significant damage that can occur to the brain, the cardiovascular system, the immune system, and other organs and systems. And the virus is just a destructive force that people can also be reinfected with. And I think there's a lot more I could add to that, but I'm supportive of the long COVID, the community-led long COVID definition that Angela just mentioned, that's currently being developed. And I think it'll be a more updated, robust definition, and people can add their comments to that still until March 6th. So look for the form on the ILCA website and provide your feedback. There are just certain aspects that weren't in the other definitions, like long COVID can be fatal, and that the virus is persistent and things like that need to be in there. For my personal journey, I can't analyze and rationalize my long COVID in any other way than SARS-CoV-2 is persisting. That doesn't mean there are not other issues occurring as well, such as reactivations and damage, but the course of my long COVID seems to be SARS-CoV-2 persistence, persistent mediated. And one of the main reasons I believe that is because I've done antivirals, especially SARS-CoV-2 specific antivirals, and they have been amongst the most helpful things for me, monoclonal antibodies in particular. Another reason is when I'm trying to rationalize why I would experience my long COVID as something that seemed to periodically move around the body and affect one area or system for days or weeks, and then move to another in a similar way to acute COVID, where it's kind of up and down. I don't know how to rationalize that wasn't the virus. It would cycle back around then after that as well through the organs and systems, but the symptoms seemingly wouldn't be as harsh as the first time. But in March 14th is when 2020 is when I got symptomatically sick. So this process wouldn't be so easily explained by reinfection anyways, even if reinfection were common earlier in the pandemic, which I don't think it was, due to mitigation. People were masking, taking it serious, and for other reasons. So it's hard for me to look at that and substitute anything else in other than SARS-CoV-2 and expect to have the same results and the same experience I had. So I believe it's viral persistence. Nothing else seems to make sense. And with long COVID, I almost died. I had 170 plus symptoms myself. I had Guillain-Barré syndrome. I had all sorts of things that were incredibly scary. And I'm lucky to still be alive and be a little better than I was, earlier on in this, but not particularly good today. You could probably hear it in my voice. I have I have that voice. So that's how I look at long COVID.
Thank you for sharing so much of your journey with us, Devin, as a fellow long COVID survivor who also got Guillain-Barré. I remember you sharing your story, and I know you've heard mine, and I think it's helpful for others to get to hear your story as well. It really makes a huge difference to be able to hear real stories.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing. The next question is, what is the urgency that motivated you to create the Long COVID Foundation?
The urgency for me to create the Long COVID Foundation was that I had already experienced chronic disease with chronic Lyme and was diagnosed with symptomatic syndromes, where I bounced around the system for about 11 years until I was able to recover. And then I also managed a chronic illness center clinic for 4 years until I got long COVID, and heard a lot of similar stories to my own. And on top of that, I knew what had happened to chronic Lyme, where the government and the health agencies named it officially post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. Of course, this is a term that nobody with chronic Lyme really uses because we all know the Borrelia and the tick-borne pathogens are chronic. So they refuse to go along with the name that kind of it puts the blame back on them. And I didn't want that to happen with long COVID. And you could see how that could easily happen with long COVID. It's such a big problem, 400 million plus people in a few years. And that number is probably much higher than that as well. So that's a problem everybody would like to push into the corner, so to speak. So this previous experience made me want to co-found the Long COVID Foundation, as I didn't want the same issues to corrupt long COVID. And unfortunately, it seems they are somewhat. So I think we have to push back against that, or it's going to be the death of us, or at least our lives are going to be significantly shortened for hundreds of millions of us, and including millions of children who are suffering and will continue to suffer if we don't get mitigation, testing, and treatments. So there isn't a world where we get solutions if we aren't specific about what's going on with long COVID. Vague terms won't do it and have never done it before. So I don't know why we would think it would now. Tests and treatments for SARS-CoV-2 persistence, the spike, the RNA, reactivated pathogens in particular should be the number one focus. And I think eyeballs too often get shifted off the pathogens and onto something else that never produces results for the chronically ill. We don't have good testing or solutions for many acute and chronic pathogens. And I think that's where you have to start. So I felt based off that experience, I could add something, and I wanted to try to steer things in a certain direction, one that isn't about vagueness or conflation, which is what the powers that be prefer. And sometimes even advocacy orgs and researchers and others go right along with it. But we need specificity and solutions. And I want the Long COVID Foundation to exist, so it doesn't have to exist, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. What a thoughtful response, Devin. Our next question is, first I want to say that I was thrilled to see that you were the patient representative at the Long COVID Roundtable, where the government officials talked about creating a consortium. Can you share with us, how is the consortium going to benefit the long COVID community?
I know they use the word consortium. There is no formal consortium at the moment, and there hasn't been much talk about that with the HHS representatives that I've spoken to since. But I've been more focused with them on how to progress with mitigation, testing, trials, and treatments, and other things for those with long COVID. So there's been a little progress of late, but we need so much at this point, six plus years in. So one good thing about a group or groups, if they decide to go that route, would be a discussion can actually happen. And right now there's a lot of silos, and people there's certain favor to certain ideas that can't get challenged or discussed. So that's probably not in favor of the patient, because their voice can get more easily drowned out. And my worry is that there's competing concerns and interests from us patients versus other parties. So we need to make sure that patients' voice comes first, because they're all that really matter. We should have one main goal: swift solutions, so that we can be healthy again. And does anyone else have that goal? No, they don't, not like we do. You could argue it's the benefit of some other parties to go slow, to be vague, to conflate, ignore viral persistence, ignore good drug and test candidates for financial or other reasons, and ignore the virus altogether, or to do a number of other things that are against the patient's interests. So they're not sick, and we are, and they don't feel the urgency that we do. They're not suffering and wanting their lives back like we do. They're not talking, and they're talking about long COVID in a different context, and often for different reasons than us. So we need to be aware of this and make sure patients come first, and make sure we always have a voice.
Absolutely. Thank you for that wonderful reply. Should long COVID patients turn to AI for diagnosis support and treatment options when they're drowning in gaslighting and this diagnostic odyssey?
Yeah, this was an interesting question. I'm going to leave aside some of the general arguments for or against AI and kind of focus on the scientific aspect and the long COVID aspect. I think it could help with providing some information. But, I always think of the old saying where don't go to WebMD and look up your symptoms, right? Because problems could arise from that. But I don't see AI replacing a doctor totally, and I wouldn't use it in place of one. If you don't like your doctor, unfortunately, you have to keep searching for a more knowledgeable one. I mean, I had to go through that process with chronic Lyme. It took years, unfortunately, to find some more doctors that were helpful and understood things better. But I think it could be a useful tool to equip patients when they go into the doctor's office to ask certain questions and have certain knowledge, but it's still pretty imperfect and it can give incorrect information at times, I see. So if patients haven't found the perfect solution for long COVID, I don't think AI has it at the moment either. We've tried so many things and searched so many places for help. I think AI has the potential more for specific use by the government and researchers and health agencies to analyze large data sets. I think that's where it will come into play more so than anything. And I still think this has issues like my headache with chronic Lyme and my headache with long COVID. AI might see that as the same, but those headaches were very different headaches and different for different causes, different reasons happened as well. So we have to be, vigilant of that because you could analyze the data improperly. But I think there's a lot of patient information that's just not being analyzed, and AI may be able to help with that if it's done correctly.
Great, thank you. Next, I'd like to ask you about what it's been like for you as a long COVID patient. Can you share your challenges in seeking care for long COVID?
I think I probably had less of a challenge than most because I had already gone through chronic Lyme and found good doctors and done a lot of treatments. And I was also, managing a clinic where I had a lot of access to treatments and different things as well. So I had been through that process and I had gone through that steep learning curve already, although I had to learn more things with long COVID. Obviously, it's different than chronic Lyme. So, I don't know if I would be alive without that basis. If I had to go through that steep learning curve and start from scratch, I would have been in trouble, I think. So maybe chronic Lyme was a blessing in disguise that saved my life with long COVID, ironically enough. But even though even then I had challenges because people didn't understand long COVID, didn't believe it. I got it in March of 2020, so really the patients were telling the doctors what was going on at that point, then the doctors understanding that SARS-CoV-2 was leading to long COVID. So I haven't found the perfect treatment yet. I'm definitely not all better. I'm feeling it today. And I had to deal with all the costs of that because a lot of that was out of pocket, not covered by insurance. So I was fortunate enough to be able to do that and have some discounted rates from working at the clinic and all of that from things I could do. But it was tough. And my family just doesn't understand this. They think some of my family, they think I could just go to Stony Brook University, go to the top doctors there and have them find the problem and fix the problem like that. But that's just not the way it goes. So the biggest challenge to me is that there is no test and no great treatment readily available to me. And if there were, I would find a way to get it.
Absolutely. That's a really good point and a nice segue into the next question. How does the lack of FDA approved treatments and barriers to diagnosis affect the cost of care and access to effective treatments?
I think it's paramount that we develop and improve treatments for long COVID. Otherwise, they'll be near impossible to get or cost too much for people to to take. There are drugs out there for SARS-CoV-2 waiting for FDA approval, like Encitravir being one that just seems to drag on in the approval process. Not sure what is taking so long, but I think having an approved test and biomarkers for long COVID is incredibly important to help these barriers.
Absolutely. Are long COVID specialists limited in recommending over-the-counter medications and supplements, but unable to prescribe treatments such as antivirals, immune modulators, monoclonal antibody therapy, or IVIG, intravenous immunoglobulin therapy?
Well, I think some doctors are less risk averse, and most doctors are pretty risk averse. So, risk not necessarily meaning, they're going to prescribe something that's a dangerous drug, but risk more meaning they don't understand long COVID. They aren't sure if the drug will help, aren't familiar with the drug because they never prescribe it. They don't want to get in trouble for prescribing it or for something that's not for its intended use. I think they can be adverse to trying a lot of things. But speaking on IVIG specifically, I tested positive for small fiber neuropathy, but that wasn't enough to qualify me for IVIG, which I had some interest in years ago, but I didn't have any condition that would qualify me. So if I remember correctly, I had a doctor that would go through with it, but I would have had to pay an exorbitant amount out of pocket, and I wouldn't, I didn't know what the results might be from that anyways. So I didn't go through with it. So I think it can be hard. It is difficult to get these things, and doctors can certainly be cautious with providing these to patients.
We have a very shared experience with that. Fortunately, I was able to get it after I had Guillain-Barré, and I had really significant impact like you did, and my insurance did cover it.
Oh, great.
Still does. So, but I'm wondering if you have noticed any insurance coverage issues with repurposing FDA-approved medications for long COVID.
Yeah, I mean, when I did my monoclonal antibodies, I can't remember if insurance covered it, but I definitely had to at least pay for the administration of it, which was a couple $100. So that was back 2021, 2022. But, insurance looks to deny anything it reasonably can, and oftentimes anything it can unreasonably can. So there is always an issue there. Especially if there's no test to show that the drug's effectiveness, or to show what the patient has and what you're treating. I think that's always going to be a problem. I think it comes back to not having a test for a lot of these answers, unfortunately. And costs only continue to rise. So I think insurance companies will always look to deny covering where they can. So we need tests for long COVID.
I agree 100% with that one. The next question is about the CDC's clinical overview of long COVID that listed potential etiologies, including organ damage resulting from the acute phase of the infection, complications from a dysregulated inflammatory state, microvascular dysfunction, ongoing viral activity associated with the persisting viral reservoir, autoimmunity, and inadequate antibody response. And as you are well aware, there are over 200 reported long COVID symptoms. And in California, the Fallbrook Medical Center is now recommending clinicians to use the 12 symptoms from NIH RECOVER's 2023 Research Index to diagnose patients. What's the impact of this mistake on long COVID patients?
Well, some time ago, I looked at the 12 symptoms scorecard and I did the math for myself. Basically, so if people don't understand, there are 12 long COVID symptoms with set points for each. And if you add those points up that are associated with your symptoms and it totals 12 or more, you meet the criteria for long COVID. So I did this and I got a score of 18, which, of course makes sense. But, this score was based on my 2007 to 2018 chronic Lyme. So, that was a time when it was impossible to have long COVID because SARS-CoV-2 didn't exist in nature. So you could see how that could be, a problem if I'm meeting the criteria for a previous disease where I couldn't have had long COVID. So I think that pretty clearly illustrates the downfall of trying to use symptoms to diagnose long COVID. We need tests and biomarkers, being a little repetitive, and I don't think there's any way around that. It just feels like each answer goes back to that. Long COVID will never be dealt with any seriousness until that happens. Symptoms can always be dismissed or can be said they're of another cause. And on top of that, real treatments will never come. I think we need to learn that from the history of chronic diseases. If your disease is based on symptoms only and not the ongoing underlying cause of the symptoms, you're in trouble.
Absolutely. Thank you. What are the pros and cons for a research index that has limited number of symptoms to be totally different from a diagnostic criteria for long COVID that includes every patient who can't recover following an infection of SARS-CoV-2?
I think including 100% is never easy, and which is why we need a good test as opposed to symptom scorecards. Because I think only then will the majority of those with long COVID be identified, even though nothing is 100%. The way it goes with other chronic diseases that operate in a similar sphere with, long COVID is that treatments, will be developed and then people will have the ability to get them prescribed to them, once there's a test. And even if their test is negative, which happens a lot with chronic Lyme, once that problem is identified and becomes common knowledge, even with that negative test, people can still get those treatments. I was able to, my Lyme tests, often came back negative, but was still able to get antibiotics and things like that because there was a basis for chronic Lyme, and because not that the test is good, but it's better than having no test. But at that point, people are able to get it even with negative tests. So I don't think it's a matter of finding the perfect thing that's going to find 100% of people. I think you can have a patchwork of different tests to try to get to that number. But once you have identified what is going on with people with long COVID, then develop treatments based on that, because there will be investment. Then I think it will make it easier for a lot of people.
Thank you. As you're aware, grants have been cut for long COVID, but there is an increase in infection-associated chronic illness in general. How does this shift in research focus impact the hundreds of millions of long COVID patients who are anxiously awaiting diagnostic biomarkers, targeted treatments, and antivirals?
Well, I think different chronic diseases need specific funding for each, as they have unique problems and unique causes. Long COVID needs its own dedicated funding for sure. It's 400 million people worldwide. It's the fastest growing chronic disease, and probably the largest, I would say, as well. So lumping different chronic diseases together and splitting peanuts and expecting results has never historically worked, and it won't now either. No one with HIV in the 1970s or the 1980s would accept having HIV called an infection-associated chronic condition or illness, which has suddenly appeared during the ongoing SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And why should we? SARS-CoV-2 is persistent. It's a unique problem. It's very damaging, vascular issue. And I get there's limited funding, and researchers would prefer sometimes to lump diseases together for their own purposes. But that doesn't change the fact what the long COVID community needs for real results, or what other chronic illness communities need as well. So we need to deal with SARS-CoV-2 first. It's persistent. It's reinfecting people. We need to mitigate it. We need drugs for it. We need to develop testing for it. And we need to develop and approve more treatments for it. And until you adequately address the virus, you will never know where people actually stand in terms of damage, reinfections, other infections, microbiome dysbiosis, autoimmunity, mast cell activation, and the likes. And time again, the pathogens aren't addressed. How are there no approved drugs for EBV with all we know it can do? How's that possible at this point? And how do we still have poor testing and treatment for chronic Lyme and other tick-borne pathogens, knowing it's the great imitator causing so many problems in people? I mean, long COVID really I would categorize as the greatest imitator, greater than chronic Lyme. I've had both, so I'm allowed to say that, I guess. And SARS-CoV-2 should be the top thing we get a handle on for all the reasons I just mentioned, because we're just not going to know where we are until we do that.
Absolutely. So, Devin, our last question for you this evening, verbally. There are a bunch in the chat, so maybe you could take a little bit of time after we're finished talking and answer some of the questions in the chat for us.
Sure.
Why are we seeing fewer men being included in long COVID adult cohorts when studies show that men are more likely to experience severe COVID-19 outcomes, including cardiovascular complications?
I think part of that might be because it might be kind of a man issue. The joke about how men don't want to ask for directions, or how men, need to act macho and just continue on as everything is fine. I think that could be part of it. Men seem to die at a higher rate than women with due to acute COVID. And women seem to have a higher rate of long COVID. But like I just said, that might be partly due to man's nature of not seeking or asking for help for their problems, or even acknowledging them. I think we have a staggering number of people who have long COVID who have no clue that they do, or don't want to associate the issues with COVID because it's COVID. So either way, the differences may be there in demographics, but it's not so lopsided, even with the statistics that we have, that anybody should be calling acute death, the vast majority is male, or the long COVID is the vast majority are women-based. It's a women-based disease. There might be a slight tips of the scale there, but I mean, everybody who's sick with long COVID needs solutions, and that's how I tend to look at it. And it's an anybody and everybody problem, including children, 400 million plus worldwide problem. And I would bet that's quite an undercount. And I just see illness all around me like I've never seen before. And it was something that was always on my mind because I had a chronic illness. I worked at a chronic illness centric. So it wasn't like I was just numb to it and not paying attention to it. I was, but it's way worse now. Almost everybody, in my family from different bloodlines, not just two, like 7 bloodlines, they're all sick with weird, strange problems. Some of them understand it's COVID and have associated with COVID, but many have not.
Thank you so much, Devin, for giving us such wonderfully thoughtful responses tonight. And I really appreciate you spending this time with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Devin. I just want to add that I totally agree with you. I think COVID-19 affect both men and women, boys and girls, all genders, and also long COVID affect everybody. I lost 2 friends, one to COVID, one to long COVID, and they're both men. So I definitely do not think that long COVID is a feminist thing. I believe that it affects everybody. Prevention is really, really important. Wearing a mask is really easy to do. And with that said, I want to pass the mic to Paul Hennessy. He's our advisor for Advocacy, and Paul is going to give the closing remarks.
Thank you. I've listened to some incredible speakers today. Hi, Devin. And it is heartbreaking after 6 years that we've been calling for the same things, and we still don't have meaningful treatments or social support for people with long COVID. Millions are living with debilitating symptoms months and years after infection. There's a laundry list, 200 plus symptoms, but whether that be cognitive dysfunction that steals careers, autonomic dysfunction, immune dysfunction, and just everyday illnesses that are more dangerous, silent organ damage, and cancer diagnosis after COVID. Fact is, there's still too many people who are dismissed, passed around, or told it's anxiety. It's a multi-system disease, affects the brain, immune system, cardiovascular system, and more. And long COVID is a mass disabling event that can happen to anyone, no matter your age or health status. So it still deserves urgency, even after 6 years. It deserves funding. It deserves serious public health intervention. And yes, things are bleak at the federal level. Public health protections are being rolled back. Funding is being cut. Disabled people are neglected by both the right and the left. The messaging is being sent by our leaders to move on, but we don't have to accept that. The mainstream public has bought into the lie that COVID is now mild and you don't have to protect yourself with masks and clean indoor air. But we have to keep the message up any way we can, because I've seen this movement grow in the past 6 years. So while I know it's discouraging, we have to keep pushing. I don't have long COVID, but I see this health crisis for what it is, and I find ways to educate and push for it. And I invite anyone who's not affected by it, I encourage you to fight for those who can't. Because change is not only going to come from Washington, it comes from cities, from counties, school boards, hospital systems, regular people who decide to show up and keep yelling the term long COVID in any and all public forums. Clean indoor air, for instance, is not a luxury, it's infrastructure. We regulate clean water, we regulate food safety, we can regulate air. The technology's there, ventilation, filtration. These are tools that we have right now. We can push for in schools, healthcare, workplaces. N95s in healthcare should be standard, of course. No patient should be infected by any illness while seeking care. And no healthcare worker should be forced to choose between their job and their health. And to that point, local action works. I know that because a small group of us helped make Long COVID Day official here in Los Angeles. That didn't happen because the federal government let it. It happened because people looked for public comment, partnered with local organizations. We made phone calls and just refused to be ignored. Obviously, that's a jumping off point. The work isn't done, but, incremental change can happen at that local level. So I encourage everyone to look at city council agendas, show up to public comment, whether that be on the Federal Register or anywhere else, partner with disability groups, push hospitals on masking policies, find opportunities. It's that easy. And ask your workplace about ventilation. Small actions all compound, and the work continues. So if you consider yourself, a leftist, if you believe in collective care and systemic change, that starts with protecting the most vulnerable, disabled people, with immunocompromised people, with workers who don't get to opt out of exposure. Long COVID has reshaped millions of lives, but it's also built a community that understands that public health is a necessity. And unfortunately, it's not going to magically disappear. It's something that didn't just happen to people in 2020. It's still happening now. So we're not exaggerating. We won't accept preventable harm as the cost of doing business. So as I close, I encourage everyone to sign the petition that Mask Together America put out to light up New York City Hall teal on March 15th for Long COVID Awareness Day. If you happen to be in Los Angeles, be sure to look at City Hall the night of the 15th as well. It's also Oscar night, so hopefully that gets us some great exposure as well. And yeah, be sure to follow Mask Together America on social and look out for their next Long COVID Defense series in June. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to all of our attendees. This community is stronger because you are all here, and your choice to come here and educate yourselves and spend this time in community is beneficial to more than just you. You are protecting your neighbors, you are protecting your family members, and you now have knowledge that you can share with the rest of the world. So thank you for being here and continuing to learn and to kind of hold each other in these spaces. I know it means a ton to the long COVID community that are here with us. And, especially Julie works really hard to put these forums together. And I know that it means a ton to her when you show up to these and learn about long COVID from the experts. So thank you for being here. Again, this actionnetwork.org petition is in the chat to light up New York City Hall for Long COVID Awareness Day. I was told if they get 300 signatures, they're going to go and meet Mayor Mamdani to deliver the petition in person. And when I just checked, it looked like we're only 30-something signatures shy of that number. So we're really close, and I see more than 30 people on this call. So I feel like if we all push this over the edge today, we could get this done. And, maybe share it with a couple friends. And I think we can get this to 300 tonight. So please sign that. And we are planning another long COVID forum. We're looking at potentially June. We don't have a date set yet, but make sure that you're following Mask Together on MaskTogetherAmerica on social media so that you can get all of the updates. MaskTogetherAmerica.org. We are on Instagram at MaskTogetherAmerica. We are on X at Together We Mask. We are on Threads at Mask Together America, YouTube at Mask Together America 5206, and Facebook.com/Mask Together America. So I will throw all of those links in the chat. You can follow us at any place you could possibly want to follow. You have your option of places. So look for the recording after the event. Thank you all for being here, and stay strong, and we love you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, everybody. Please make our dream come true. I'm in New York. Same for Dr. Corthals. A lot of us are in New York. We really want to see our city hall light up. Please share the petition. We can do this. Once we reach 300, we're going to just go to Mamdani's office and deliver the letter. Please sign and share. Thank you very much.
I just want to say, just because I just checked, we have 10 more signatures than the last time I checked. So now we only need 23 more to hit that number. So go share it. Ask 5 friends to sign it. We'll get there.